Hello, my name is Cory Edmund Endrulat, and this is The Lord of the Rings Dethroned, a presentation by me, myself, my name, Cory Edmund Endrulat, as you see on the slide. This is going to give us a lot of insight. If you are somebody who loves The Lord of the Rings, or you've watched The Hobbits before, you've read the books by Mr. J.R.R. Tolkien, here you'll recognize there's going to be some quotes not only from the books but from his own writings that maybe you've never were aware of before. There's connections that not a lot of people have made with Tolkien's own writings, his own books, and what we see ultimately as the truth about power, the nature of power represented through his works. And we see it in depth, we see it in detail, and we can understand it, and I'm going to break it all down for you here in this presentation. Very simple. We're also going to see a lot of very meaningful, very important themes within these writings, these works, that tell us a lot about our current day and what solutions that we can use for our current day to become better as ourselves, to look toward that future on our journey of life, our adventure, going into the vast world of Middle Earth, because that's where we are. We're on Earth, and we are traveling through sometimes unknown lands with shadows, evils that we have to fight that we're not always aware of. And what we want to do is create a bit of consciousness in that regards, in recognizing what is that evil, how do we destroy that evil, and how do we create peace and prosperity for all of the world to see. So this is The Lord of the Rings Unthroned. Let's continue. In introduction, this presentation offers unique lessons to learn in the modern world based on the Lord of the Rings world and its creator, J.R.R. Tolkien. In this presentation, we will observe the nature of human beings possessing power, how it's created into manifestation for deceiving and corrupting themselves or others, as well as observing how to dethrone the Lord of the Rings from his controlling authority. A preface. First of all, I'm going to actually use Tolkien's own quotes to introduce this presentation. Tolkien stated, quote, "It is, I suppose, impossible to write any story that is not allegorical in proportion as it comes to life, since each of us is an allegory, embodying in a particular tale and clothed in the garments of time and place, universal truth and everlasting life." We're going to revisit some of these ideas, this idea of universal truth. So some disclaimers. Tolkien also states, quote, "It is not about anything but itself." This, he's referring to Lord of the Rings and his works among the Hobbits. Certainly, it has no allegorical intentions, general, particular, or topical, moral, religious, or political. Affixing labels to writers, living or dead, is an inept procedure in any circumstances, a childish amusement of small minds, and very deadening, since at best it overemphasizes what is common to a selected group of writers and distracts attention from what is individual and not classifiable in each of them, and is the element that gives them life if they have any. So Tolkien writes in a certain format that might be difficult for some people to digest at first, and I understand that. But what he's saying here is, don't attach labels to his works. Don't make these connections and say, oh, well, look, this is that, because the story is meant to represent itself. We're not looking at Tolkien himself as a writer, because people might attach him to all the stuff, but he obviously has thoughts to say about it, and he has writings to say about it. We do want to look, however, at the story for what it is itself, regardless of him, because this story, he's saying, should be interpreted about itself, not anything but itself. And so that's what we're going to do here in this presentation. I wanted to make that very clear from the get-go. There's a lot of people who might say, oh, well, Tolkien was a Catholic, you know, he has a lot of religious themes in there. It's not about that. It's about looking at the story, what it means, because that is what we can learn from. And not just that, like I said, if you are somebody who loves the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and maybe also you're completely new to that trilogy, we're going to go over everything you need to know in regards to perhaps some what you saw whether you watch the movies or whether you read the books, and if you're new to it, what the themes are within these movies, within these books, that make it so important or appealing to understand this information. Because there is knowledge behind why the characters did what they did, why they went to Mount Doom with the ring and destroyed it, as we saw in The Lord of the Rings. And this is a story that a lot of people have held now through quite a bit of time, and a lot of video games have based on. Now you have a lot of other movies that are influenced by it. And of course, Tolkien was also influenced by a lot of mythology and a lot of ancient history to understand the themes that he was also bringing up. You know, the idea of orcs and goblins and trolls and elves, but there's also humans. So we're going to look at that, right? Because, I mean, you and I, we're human beings in this world, and we can actually learn from a world of fantasy. Is it really fantasy? Or is it a creative manifestation of something that we can learn from because us human beings created it? Us human beings were the ones who put it into interpretation. Perhaps these mythologies are not so unrealistic as they may claim to be mythologies. So have an open mind to this presentation, because I have to make that first and foremost. You might be introduced to some topics you never heard before, but like I said, there's a lot of quotes in here from Tolkien himself, and if you are completely new to, you never read his own letters, his personal letters, which is all out in the public, well, this is going to go over some of what he says, and it's pretty shocking. So let's continue here. Who is the Lord of the Rings? So, you know, I watched the Lord of the Rings, and it's funny because if somebody asked me, well, who's the Lord of the Rings? I actually was like, wait, who is the Lord of the Rings? I watched the movie, I know what they were trying to do. They were destroying the ring, these people, and there was this bad guy, and, you know, his name was Sauron, I believe, right? And, but the title of the movie and of the books is The Lord of the Rings. And yet, I didn't make the connection that, wait, who is the Lord of the Rings? And there is the Lord of the Rings, and if anybody read the books and movies, you probably know this answer, but there's some people who don't know that answer. Well, who is the Lord of the Rings? It's this guy. It's this guy right here. Now, he looks cool, but it's not cool to be evil, because this guy is the villain in the Lord of the Rings, and his name is Sauron. Sauron, also known as, because these people, all the people in Middle-earth, this is the area through which the Lord of the Rings takes place. They all have nicknames, they all have names that are translated through the different languages of all the different races. Like I said, elves, trolls, goblins, these are all different races within Lord of the Rings. And so they all have different translations of this name Sauron, and they also have their own dialect in saying, well, this is what he represents. Because at one time, Sauron was another thing, and at another time, Sauron was another thing. We're going to talk about that. So Sauron is also known as the Lord of the Rings, the enemy, the nameless enemy, the deceiver, the Dark Lord, the Lord of Barad-dûr, the Lord of Mordor, the Necromancer, the Abhorred, and Gorthar. Okay? Now I'm sure there's probably even more names for this guy, but that right there tells us a lot right now. And the reason why is because we can break down some of these terms and we can see a common theme. Abhor in Latin, ab, which means off or away from, plus horror, which means to tremble at or shudder. We see that means that we're in fear. Gorthar, Sindarian for gore, which means horror or dread. We see the same thing. Thor, which means abominable or abhorrent. Well, he is the abhorred. So this makes sense. Abominable, from Latin abominabilis, means deserving abhorrence. Going back to abhorrence, going back to horror. Again, we're in fear. So this guy we call Sauron is essentially this embodiment of fear. The curator of fear. The person who's bringing fear out in a lot of people because they fear him. They fear the presence of him. Sauron. Okay? So, Sauron is not just the Lord of the Rings, he is actually the second Dark Lord. So, although in the movies and in the books we hear of Sauron as this sort of main villain, you know, this guy that is this evil person, this is the one that we're going against, right? And just like in all the different movies, this is the evil villain. Well, this is the evil villain, But there's also a lot of other themes behind it, because if we notice that he is technically this manifestation of fear, then perhaps fear is also the enemy as well, not just Sauron. And how did he become Sauron in the first place? We need to ask these questions. He's the second Dark Lord, so it's not that he's the first. Who was the first? We're going to answer all these questions. Sauron is the only being who could have the Lord of the Rings title, because he is not just the master of the One Ring, which we'll go over, he is also maintains control of the other rings of power that he had planned to slave to the One Ring. So this guy basically created rings for the other races on Earth, on Middle-earth. And he had one ring that had control over basically all the other rings. So all the other rings that he handed out to others, essentially, he was able to manipulate their minds. We have quotes for that too. His original name was Mehron, meaning the admirable or excellent. So that's very different from what we heard before, wasn't it? Where we heard abhorred and deceiver. Now we have admirable or excellent. What is that about? He demonstrated the ability to take the form of a wolf, a serpent, and a vampire. Take that as you wish. I'm not going to break down all the symbology of that, but I'm sure you can find some in that. Being called the necromancer, he was also called a sorcerer of dark magic. We're going to talk about this idea of sorcery. We see magic very apparent in not just The Lord of the Rings, but a lot of other films as well. Is there such a thing? And what is that in this world? How does someone go from admirable to the abhorred or the deceiver? This is the question for you. And I'm going to help you connect the dots a bit in this presentation. I don't expect to give you all the answers. Again, this isn't supposed to be this or that in particular. We're looking at the underlying meaning here within the film for what it is itself, and looking at Tolkien's own writings about what it is itself. And we see a lot of connections to be made. We see a lot of life lessons that could be made. Again, practical actions that we can also take, I will get into in this presentation. So who is this guy? Who is this guy? He seems kind of big. He looks a little different from Sauron. You can notice a very similar theme. He looks pretty evil, right? Doesn't look like the best, most nice guy. You know, he's got his fist open. He's got some fire with him. Got some pretty cool looking armor, it seems, but this is not Sauron. This is somebody else. His name is Melkor, otherwise known as Morgoth. So Melkor or Morgoth, he goes by either name, and he's actually the first Dark Lord. So the first. Not a lot of people are always familiar with this guy because he's not necessarily in all the books and all the movies. You don't hear about him all that often. But he is ultimately the first Dark Lord, which means he might have had an influence on Sauron, who we just talked about. Let's see. He is the influence behind his servant Sauron. Quote, one who arises in might, the constrainer, or the great death. These are other names that people used for Melkor or Morgoth. Tolkien wrote that he derived Melkor from Malku, which is an Akkadian word, meaning king, equivalent to the Hebrew letters there. Okay, I don't speak Hebrew, so I don't know. But yeah, Akkadian word meaning king. So Melkor, aka the king, who arises in might, which is this form of power. And we see the constrainer. Why is he the constrainer if he arises in power? And why does Sauron call him the Lord of all and giver of freedom if he's the constrainer? So we have some really interesting dynamics here that's like, what is going on here? Why is he called the Great Death? Well, if he is a Dark Lord and we assume he's evil, then he results in a great death. What is a great death? We're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this. So don't worry if you're a little confused right now. You're like, what's going on? We're going to connect the dots. I brought this in as an introduction on purpose because we're going to go further with this. He considered himself king of the world or elder king. So this guy really wanted power. And in Sauron we saw the same things too. He was called the Master of Lies, going back to what Sauron is called the Deceiver. The Lord of the Dark. Well, if he's the first Dark Lord, you bet he's likely exemplifying this idea of dark energy, or, if you will, dark magic in the case of the necromancer or sorcery. So let's continue here. Together with Melkor, with Morgoth, we see the combination that creates the perfect storm. Mehron, who again is the former name of Sauron. His virtue was his love for order. So now we're talking about him in past tense, when he wasn't corrupted, when he wasn't evil, when he wasn't Sauron. Mehron's virtue was his love for order, planning, and coordination, disliking confusion and chaos. So sort of this obsession. As it says here, but his obsession of order gradually overshadowed his love for the other intelligent beings of Arda. Arda is another word for Middle Earth, for the whole landmass that is the world here of Lord of the Rings. So his desire for order, his obsession with it, really overshadowed sometimes what other people were seeing the world and how they were living the world. He was obsessing himself over it, and those people, they could have benefited from his ideas. It says, who would benefit from his planning, but it became the sole object of his will. It became the sole object of his will to create this order. His will. He's putting his willpower into it. The end in itself. He started admiring Melkor's power, so the first Dark Lord, to realize his designs. So perhaps this Dark Lord, this first Dark Lord, Melkor, was somebody who did admire that desire for order. And so he realized those designs quickly and masterfully. He then became known as Sauron because of that. Sauron initially wasn't as evil as Morgoth, as he was serving someone and not himself. Unlike Melkor, who wanted to unmake and corrupt the world, Sauron wished to rule it and to do what he wanted with it. So they both had some slightly different priorities. Ultimately, they ended up being on the same side. Why is that? Well, because you had Melkor's combination of denaturing life and corrupting it and sort of unmaking the world, as it says. And then you have Sauron's obsessive rule of wanting to control over everything. This is a perfect storm for control, for ultimately slavery, as Tolkien even describes later on. And so we see that this combination between Melkor's denaturing of life and Sauron's obsessive rule makes this evil manifested, because somebody could want to unmake life and they want to destroy life, but if they have no system in order to do that, it's not going to be as impactful. So Sauron came here with his masterful plans, and Melkor came there with his ideas, his intention, and they both merged together and created this form of evil, the perfect storm. So there's fear in Sauron to get him to where he is, and why he is the way that he is. Okay, it's not like he just gets there magically out of nowhere. He went from Mehron to Sauron on purpose. There was a reason for why he ended up like that. And we can see here by this chart, we start with fear, we go to ignorance, confusion, control, and evil. This we're looking at right now is inside Sauron. So the first thing we see in Sauron is fear, which is the source and sign of evil. It's the opposite of love. Fear is the opposite of love. And we saw just from the quote before that his wanting for, his obsession for order was really overshadowing his love for other human beings, and that aspect of love, it wasn't present because he just had this constant greed or ambition, if you will, for order. And so he had this ignorance because he had the desire for order without love. How could you have a really good order if you're not using love in the process? Confusion. Well, he had the desire for recognition and power, right? And he was confused because no one else would recognize it. Who was going to recognize it? Well, Melkor was there. He was waiting for it. He wanted it because he knew it would grow his own power. So he was confused because, you know, he was ignoring the love, and he wanted order, and he didn't know how to get it. And so you had somebody that comes and say, hey, I can help you. Put your dependence on me. You can become my servant, but ultimately we're in this together. We're going to create a better world, in their view of it, of course. And so this confusion and his desire for recognition and power leads to control, which is the worship of Morgoth or Melkor, because he's like, man, this guy recognizes me. He understands what I'm trying to do. So now you have the system of control internally, where he's like, yeah, you know, this is the only one who's going to come understand my power. He's got power to bring this into manifestation. And so what we see here is then embracing this order that they now created, though of course it's through darkness. Through darkness. And so there might have been good intentions from the start, from Mehron, who is now Sauron, but he became corrupted because he fell through this path of, whoa, wait, no one's going to recognize me but this guy who's evil, but at least he recognizes my plans. And he might be evil, but at least he understands my want for order, and I can take over everything. And it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you seek power, perhaps that is the problem itself. We're going to observe that. We're going to observe that deeply. And so we have the fear of Sauron. Because he has fear within, there's also fear throughout. He's projecting this fear onto everybody else. They feel it. They feel the energy. And so fear, again, the source and sign of evil, the opposite of love. That leads to ignorance, where, you know, a lot of people from the Shire, for example, are saying, oh, I don't want to accept the fact that there's evil out there. You know, ignorance is bliss, essentially. And, you know, if you're not being directly deceived and allowing yourself to just be consumed by the darkness, this is how darkness comes to consume people, they're just sitting there in ignorance, like, oh, it's okay, I don't have to worry about it. I'll just let things happen, you know, and hopefully it'll get solved out. I don't want to have to worry about it. You know, evil coming to my until it comes to my land, I'm not going to care about it. And that's ultimately sometimes what happens, right? And it's unfortunate that people have to learn through experience and not always awareness to see that there is evil present and it needs to be dealt with. And so then there's confusion based on that ignorance again, which is this question of safety. Then you have all these humans and these hobbits and dwarves, all these guys, and they're all questioning, well, are we going to be safe? Are we going to really be in peace as much as we are now if we allow this evil to spread? And so then they have this need. They're like, well, oh my gosh, it's getting confusing and things are getting chaotic. Now I need order. Are they going to give in to the darkness that's knocking on their door? Or are they going to fight back with courage? So we have control. Again, because now we have this sense of dependence, some people are going to give in. It becomes now the worship of Sauron in his ideals, that being the darkness, the evil. And so embracing order through though of darkness. Okay, so we can call something order. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily good or bad. There's a lot of people in history, all throughout history, you have leaders of the world for security and order and peace and security and all these different terms to try to represent, hey, we're in a state of chaos right now, and if you put me in power, well, I can create order. And if we do this, we'll create order. And order is always used as this appeal to these ideas of, I get to control you. I get to be in control. And that's what we see. So Tolkien states, Sauron had found it useful, for he had few servants, but many slaves of fear. So he didn't have many servants. He had slaves, and they were of fear. People, when they're in a state of fear, this is going to lead them to ignorance, confusion, control, and evil. If they're in a state of love, we see a completely different scenario. And I'll show you what that looks like. But as far as I'm concerned, if we start with fear, it's not going to head in the right direction. All our actions are not going to be based on knowledge and wanting to learn and have the courage to stand up, but actually we're just going to do things out of fear. Oh my gosh, instinct, survival. Not necessarily thinking about the implications or the complications, thinking very firsthand, oh, I need to make sure I'm secure, and this fake sense of security, or other people will be secure for me because darkness is taking over, they're taking over, I should just submit my will to them, and everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. Keep in mind, this didn't just happen to Sauron himself, it's going to happen to everybody who then gets influenced by Sauron because he seeks power. So what is magic and sorcery? Because obviously this is having a big influence over people's minds, and if Sauron's called the necromancer and he has this dark magic and these people are dark lords, what does that even mean? What do these terms mean? Well, Tolkien states, quote, Galadriel speaks of the deceits of the enemy. Well enough, but magia was held good per se, and Gotia bad. Okay, so he's now making distinctions between two different types of magic, magia and Gotia. Neither is, in this tale, good or bad per se, but only by motive or purpose or use. So nothing is necessarily inherently good or bad, but it depends on the user, the person who's using that magic. Both sides use both, but with different motives. The supremely bad motive is, for this tale, since it is specially about it, domination of other free wills. So there you go, you have it from Tolkien, right from himself. You don't have to take it from me anymore. He says, especially in this use, for this tale, it is about the domination of other free wills. That is what magic is being used for. So, when we say dark sorcery or Sauron is the necromancer, what do you think he's using magic for? Is it for control? Controlling people's minds? The enemy, which we know is another nickname for Sauron the necromancer, the enemy's operations are by no means all goetic deceits, but magic that produces real effects in the physical world. But his magia he uses to bulldoze both people and things, and his goeta to terrify and subjugate. Terrify and subjugate. What does that mean? Fear, ignorance, confusion, control. You have fear through the terrifying, control through the subjugation. Their magia, the elves and the Gandalf use sparingly, is a magia producing real results like a fire and a wet faggot for specific beneficent purposes. Okay? So they're using magic in good ways, the elves and Gandalf. Gandalf is a wizard. They're not the same necessarily as Sauron. Sauron was actually an elf as well, and he became corrupted. But I'm saying that the type of magic that they use is completely different. Sauron's using magic in a dark sense, and you may see Gandalf and the elves are using it in a more light sense, because it's more empowering, helping people, rather than using it against people to manipulate them. And you'll see I have more to talk about that. Their goetic effects are entirely artistic and not intended to deceive. This is the elves and Gandalf. They never deceive. Never. Right there. So they're not evil. Elves, but may deceive or bewilder unaware men, because men don't use magic, so they're not really familiar with how it works. Since the difference is to them as clear as the difference to us between fiction, painting, and sculpture and life. So elves can make a distinction in what types of magic there are and how magic works, but for men, which is human beings, they're going to have a harder time understanding that, because human beings don't have those powers in Middle-earth, in Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, human beings are just like human beings we have in real life right now. They're not any different. We don't have any special powers of any kind. We are just like the humans in Tolkien's narrative. So, in addition, however, we have other races that live among us, that being elves and dwarves and goblins, all these other different types of races. So I wanted to include another quote here from a deoccultist. So when someone is a deoccultist, that means that they are somebody who takes knowledge that was hidden from the mass public and they bring it to light, because occult means hidden. That's what occult means, from occultist. So if someone is deocculting, they're taking something out of the dark and bringing it to light. So usually they're bringing a lot of esoteric ideas to light that people are unaware of that can be really important, such as the idea of magic. So deoccultist Mark Passio defines magic or sorcery as, quote, the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. Exactly aligned to what Tolkien was stating what this magic was used for, which is the domination of other free wills. And he separates light versus dark, as light represents open knowledge used for good, and dark represents hidden knowledge, known as occultism, used for evil, as by creating fear, ignorance, and confusion for control, as we showed also by the previous charts. So there you have it, showing you a different perspective on magic, and how it could be used for good or for bad, in this sense also dark versus light. And you'll see that theme also similar in the books and in the movies. You see Gandalf the White. He comes with this very holy power, you know, he wears a white robe just like this, right? And he's on the good side, right? He's not seeking power. He knows what it would do to him, so he doesn't seek that power. And he knows that power necessarily has to be destroyed or taken off the earth because it will cause a lot of problems. We're going to get into that, but it's to know that he's on the good side, technically, right? The good side, because he's using the light. And Sauron, always dressed in black, always using the powers of darkness, and you see Mordor is this dark place. It's dark, and it's right in front of your face, you know? Gandalf the White, he's bright, and he's got all these light shining spells of magic. And then you have Sauron on the other hand, which is all dark magic. You can see it. I mean, you see it in the films. You see it all over again every time. There's so many more connections that could be made here. The etymology of sorcery and magic are related to that of changing and influencing fate. Well, if you're changing people's minds, think about what you're doing. Because our minds become our actions become the world around us. If you change people's minds, you change their will and what they're going to do with their will, which is, you know, their action, then you're going to change the world around you. If everybody's will is attached to your idea of order, in the case of Sauron, well, then this order that he desires is going to manifest, because everybody is attaching their free will to this certain type of action, this certain type of knowledge. So, more upon this idea of magic and sorcery, Tolkien states, quote, both sides live mainly by ordinary means. The enemy, or those who have become like him, go in for machinery with destructive and evil effects, because magicians, who have become chiefly concerned to use magia for their own power, would do so, and do so. So he's saying that if they could use magic for their own power, they're going to do it. In the case of, you know, Sauron especially, who is this person who really seeks order and control, essentially, for that order to manifest, because that's how he sees order to manifest, is through control. You know, not looking at the natural order perhaps in the world, or the order that happens when people love each other and they're working together as they are, but no, this different form of order, because it's got to be in my vision of the world, and that's what Sauron was bringing to light. Except, of course, to the dark. The basic motive of magia, quite apart from any philosophic consideration of how it would work, is immediacy, which means speed, reduction of labor, and reduction also to a minimum or vanishing point of the gap between the idea or desire and the result or effect. So this goes very deep into the idea of magic, and this is Tolkien. So, you know, he talks a lot about this. You think he has an understanding of some of these concepts. It's very interesting to see this perspective. But the magia may not be easy to come by, and at any rate, if you have command of abundant slave labor or machinery, often only the same thing concealed, it may be as quick or quick enough to push mountains over, wreck forests, or build pyramids by such means. If you understand what this sentence is saying, this is crazy. So, he's saying here that magic, when it's used, can create this, with abundant slave labor or machinery, can help create anything. It can destroy worlds. It can destroy anything. And that's what we saw with Sauron, you know, building this huge empire. He's got this tower here. He's got all these orcs. They're all following in line. They're building these machines. They got tons of weaponry, tons of material. I mean, they wrecked forests. They did all these things that he's talking about. And it's all because they used magic for this fate that they wanted to create. Alright? And I say they because it's not just Sauron, it's all the people that followed Sauron. Of course, another factor then comes in, a moral or pathological one. The tyrants lose sight of objects, become cruel, and like smashing, hurting, and defiling as such. So this kind of goes into the idea of psychopathy. And the need for control and the lack of empathy lines perfectly with the idea of psychopathic traits. So right here we see the occultism of knowledge, which means keeping knowledge for myself. I get to know. I get to decide what gets to get done. Nobody else needs to know. They are not in the position of power. Knowledge is power. He's using it here. And he's a psychopath for wanting to kill people, destroy things, and not caring so much as to their feelings because it's for the greater good or for order as he claims and wants to create. It is no coincidence many video games use arcane or arcana, which is also representative for hidden knowledge. They use arcane powers to represent the idea of magic learned by books and rituals, utilizing many ritualistic symbols. And if you want an example of this, because I said there's a lot of video games that are based on, you know, not just Lord of the Rings, but these very similar like ideas of magic and sorcery, just look at Dalaran in World of Warcraft. And it's spelled D-A-L-A-R-A-N. And look at also the Kirin Tor, who also live in Dalaran. These are a bunch of mages who use magic. So there's no coincidence that these things line up, whether you're looking at the arcana, occultism, magic, sorcery, the necromancer, dark versus light, the power of knowledge. Ultimately, if you're going to get a summary on what magic and sorcery is, it is using knowledge, again, the art and science of influencing the will of others and to influence the fate of the future. Keep that in mind, because if you have a certain amount of knowledge, just like, for example, look at the way you're watching this on technology. Technology is quite like magic, isn't it? Kind of like it. Very interesting. How did we create this? A lot of knowledge involved, for sure. It seems like magic, and it's like, how does this work? And we look at the world, and it's like all this stuff is working in a harmony, in a perfect order. That is like magic. And when you understand that knowledge, and you have influence over those decisions, it's a bit like magic. So you can use magic for good or for evil. Orthanc and Saruman himself showed the danger of trusting in a wise leader. When danger threatened from Mordor, Saruman took the easy path of bending to evil. Now, in case you don't know who Saruman is, he was actually a wizard who also turned evil. He was once good. We're going to have a little bio about him as well. And so his power was flipped from serving good to spreading corruption and death. When it came down to a choice, he chose power for himself over freedom and even life for others. Sort of a selfishness, right, that comes as about. So a form of magic here is technology, what I call the second government. if we are unfree. Tolkien states upon mortality in humankind, quote, "It may become possessive, clinging to the things made as its own. The sub-creator wishes to be the Lord and God of his private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the creator, natural law, especially against mortality. Both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power, for making the will more quickly effective, and so to the machine or magic. By the last, I intend all use of external plans or devices or apparatus instead of development of the inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized." So, again, this is something that you look at his quotes and you have to break it down, and it seems like a lot, and it's like, how do I understand this at first? Right? So, I specifically would underline these parts that are really important to what we're talking about here. And what I said when I said technology is a lot like magic, he says literally right here. All right? And he says that, what we create as humankind is essentially our own creation. And we see that what he calls the sub-creator wishes to be the Lord and God of his private creation. And so he will go against, essentially, the laws of the creator. Very interesting there, because he sees himself as God. He sees himself as the creator, so I can just do whatever I want. This is a common motive among those who want to be in power, who want to be in control. And so, what you see here, so it's the machine. By the last, I intend all use of external plans or devices instead of development of the inherent inner powers or talents. So, he's recognizing inherent inner powers that we have, and you might look at that as the conscience. So you can decide what right versus wrong is and make the right decision in your own life, for example. And you could see here, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating. Some people will use their talents, may it be persuasion, for the very sole purpose of domination. And if they have certain knowledge that other people don't, do you think that they will be able to manipulate other people's minds? The answer is they will. They will, because other people don't have that knowledge, so they can't see that they're being manipulated upon. And so, what we also see is coercing other wills. What is coercion? It means forcing somebody to do something against their own will. So somebody wants to live their life freely, and somebody says, no, you're not allowed to do that. I'm going to coerce you into following me, into following what I say you must do. That is coercion. And so coercing other wills means against their own freedom, their own free will. It's no longer free will, it's controlled will. Coerced will. Another form of magic that can be seen if you observe this idea is art. Tolkien states upon the elves, quote, their magic is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete, a product in vision, in unflawed correspondence. And its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. So they don't want to denature the world. They don't want to replace what life has given to them naturally. They recognize that and they create art based on it. They are creative. They see the creation in the world around them and they recognize, wow, we can be creative based on that because there's so much that can be taken from it. And we're not going to try to replace it. We're not going to try to dominate over it. We're going to respect it. We're going to learn from it. We're going to live in harmony with it. And through our art, it'll allow us to better do that. And that is what's beautiful here about art. And in the case especially of what the elves are doing with magic, which is again, not dark magic, but light magic, good magic. So we have this thing here, right? You might be familiar with this thing. Well, it is only the most sole topic that's talked about in the Lord of the Rings. This right here is the One Ring. The One Ring. Tolkien states, quote, "The primary symbolism of the ring as the will to mere power, seeking to make itself objective by physical force and mechanism, and so also inevitably by lies." You can see this from his own writings. Like I said, this is amazing right here. Make itself objective by physical force. So think about this in the lens of intention, right? Because the One Ring was created by Sauron. He created this for a reason. What was his intention of creating this one ring if it has power over all the other rings? What's that intention to do? Well, to make itself objective by physical force. Does that mean violence? And imposing your will on other people, like we said before? It says inevitably by lies, so deception, into getting people to think certain things, so to fit your narrative for order. Well, Sauron made the One Ring, the ruling ring, that contained the powers of all the others and controlled them, so that its wearers could see the thoughts of all those that used the lesser rings, and could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. If the One Ring was actually unmade and humiliated, then its power would be dissolved. Sauron's own being would be diminished to vanishing point, and he would be reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. So much to take from this, so beautiful, in the way it's been worded here, of course. Read that last part one more time again. If the One Ring was actually unmade, Sauron's own being would be diminished. So he put his own power, his own will into this ring. His embodiment, essentially, through this ring, it's what makes him in power. It's what creates him, essentially. This is what he obsessed himself into, and he created this thing that could ultimately enslave people. Connecting the symbolism of the One Ring to our current world, the One Ring is state power, gained through statism and moral relativism. Okay, so I'm saying here, in this presentation, that the One Ring is representative for state power, statism, what ultimately gives power to Sauron. And we see that. And that's why the One Ring has to be destroyed. Okay, and so it's through statism and moral relativism. Moral relativism is will, although subjective in nature, being imposed upon others or accepted as objective, as it says right up here, to make itself objective by physical force, creating obscurity for good versus evil action, and thus allowing evil, because you don't know the distinction between the two. Moral relativism says, I can be God. It doesn't matter what's actually right or wrong. I get to decide what right and wrong is for myself. Okay? Or, if somebody gets to decide for me, ultimately, because it's subjective, it's not objective, it means that somebody's will can be imposed upon someone else, which is the whole sole object of what Sauron was trying to do, as we saw from the previous quotes, and as we see from this quote right here. So the One Ring, it's the rings of power, literally, in the name of what this ring is. It's state power gained through statism and moral relativism. And what we see here from Actual Anarchy, which is a website, they said, we are constantly told through the books that it is unable to be wielded without succumbing to its corruption, and thus spreading evil even in the attempt to do good. The power of the state is represented through the ring. Gandalf is an embodiment of good, but also an agent of power. Since Gandalf is good, Tolkien shows restraint in the way Gandalf uses his powers. Gandalf, which is the wizard, again, only uses his power when forced to do so. But he is stretched thin and cannot put out all the fires caused by the corruption of Sauron's One Ring. He can't fix all the problems himself. The One Ring is ultimately, and Sauron is in the darkness. This is the problem, and Gandalf is only one person with good powers, but he can't prevent all the problems in the world. The source of power can only be destroyed by the smallest and most free, a hobbit from the Shire. Through Gandalf and the Ring, Tolkien tells us that power cannot be fought by power. Power itself, the ring, must be destroyed, not through using force, as Gimli tried with his axe, but by letting it go, which means dropping it, releasing it into the fires of Mount Doom. The right to rule, a non-existent right created by statism, must be let go by not accepting it, not accepting relativist or fake sources of authority, and never using it, never using man's law, aligning actions to natural law, and thus destroying the ring. Destroying the ring because it is not natural. It is a thing made out of corruption, which the very nature of which is not natural. It is taking something in nature and corrupting it into a form of a denatured variety, a denatured type. And evil by its nature is the same thing, taking something that is full of life and reversing it. Again, as Melkor, the first Dark Lord, essentially the root to all this evil here, states he wants to unmake the world, completely reverse what the world is, so he can be God, so Sauron can have power, so they can have this perfect storm of unmaking the world and creating a perfect form of order, which is essentially through mass enslavement and control. So this idea of statism we're going to explore a bit more as to why it is the One Ring, but ultimately we see here the One Ring is the source of deceit. Sauron is the deceiver after all, and he created the One Ring, so that makes sense. We also see greed, materialism, and enslavement. Essentially, this is known as the magic ring, but of course it's not magic in the good sense here. This is bad, because anybody who gets a hold of this ring is like, oh, I need to keep it, it's myself. Oh, precious, I need this ring, and they get a hold of it, they want it again. It's this greed, they see the power, and they want that power, especially humans. What we see for the One Ring is fear, because people, they don't want to fear not having the ring, right? They fear not having the ring, and they want to keep it with them. So they don't want to lose the power, and they also don't want to not have the power. They want that ring for themselves. Ignorance of the dangers and warnings. People will say, oh yeah, the ring is going to corrupt you, it's going to turn you into this thing. Well, humans still felt tempted to those rings. And because of that need and that ambition and greed for power, and it called for them. They said, oh, this ring, this power calls for me. It is my duty. It's meant for me. Well, that power is ultimately a danger. And many people warned them, and yet it still ends up causing problems. We saw this all throughout the movies and in the books. You know, you saw people, part of the Fellowship, who were to destroy the ring, who ended up betraying the Fellowship because they couldn't handle the fact that the ring was among their possessions, and that if they had held that ring, they could have had all the power in the world. They can do so much with it. So they wanted it so badly for themselves, and they were ignoring the fact that it perhaps was a danger, or that, you know, it would cause everybody else to die or suffer. That was not part of the thinking process, because they were in fear of not having that power. They wanted it for themselves. And so they had confusion, because they had to fight this temptation. It's like, I want this ring, but people are saying I shouldn't, and oh, I need it, it's right there, I need to get it. Because Frodo, this hobbit, has it. Because this hobbit is free-minded, and he's not going to be swayed by the ring's power. Why is it that a hobbit is not going to be swayed by the ring's power? We'll see. Control, ultimately, because once you start giving into the ring, it's going to control you. Again, enslavement. Giving into the temptation. And so ultimately from that, you get evil, which is embracing darkness, which is saying, my precious, my ring. This is my power, my control. It's mine. And so we see here, going back to the idea of going against laws of the Creator, the idea of natural law. This is essential to understand, so we understand some of the solutions to this problem, and also understand more about the problem. Because if this is a law that is natural, and things of nature aren't necessarily good or bad, there's both, natural law governs good and bad. And so it's essential we understand these laws of the Creator, especially if certain forces of evil are going against it. What does it mean if they're going against the law, if that law applies everywhere? Well, it means perhaps they're not in harmony with these laws. They don't want to accept these laws, understand it, or spread it to others. They want to keep it for themselves, for their own power, their own gain. Again, going back to the idea of occultism, keeping this knowledge for themselves, so that way other people don't have it and they can manipulate others because they have that knowledge and they don't. The other people do not. Law of cause and effect is also known as natural law. The law of attraction is also known as natural law. Karma or moral law is also known as natural law. The golden rule is also known as natural law. So these, you've likely heard of one of them before within your own life. It's essential to understand that this is what natural law ultimately is. And if Sauron says, well, I want to control over other people, would he want that done to himself? No, because he wants that control for himself. He wants to impose his will on other people. He doesn't want other people's will being imposed on him. He has a desire for the world, his own version of order. He doesn't want other people telling him what that order should be, because he sees that he's got the perfect blueprint, and Melkor recognizes that. And so Melkor can help him manifest that for himself. So, natural law, it's the rules. We'll say what the rules are in a second as well. You'll see, quote, the rules is a common theme among what Tolkien also talks about. Law, by definition, stands for an existing condition which is both binding and immutable. What we call law in today's world, what we say, follow the law, is that really a law if it's not universal or binding or immutable? No, it isn't. And so that's why we can make a distinction between natural law and man's law. Natural law is based upon principles and truth because, well, truth is objective, it's all around us. Natural stands for inherent, all around us. It's nature. So, it's based on creation, and it's based on, ultimately, how much knowledge we have of it to harmonize with it. Our actions align to the knowledge that we now gained. Again, what we put in our mind becomes our actions, and that becomes the world around us. So, man's law is the exact opposite. It's like, you follow orders, you follow what I say, I'm Sauron. You follow what I say, otherwise you will be punished by threat of violence, as it says here. Complied with due to fear of punishment. Fear of punishment. There's no fear in the process of natural law, where it completely consists of knowledge and understanding. But there is fear entirely under the system of man's law, which is based entirely on fear of violence. Because, oh my gosh, if I don't follow orders, I'm going to be punished. So, you also notice with man's laws, it's never universal, it's never eternal, so therefore, it's always based on opinion. If it's not law, because it isn't universal and eternal, if it was, it would be natural law, so it's sort of redundant to say it's man's law, because if it's already natural law, or aligned with natural law, it just is natural law. If it's not natural law, then it's man's law. It's either one or the other. It cannot be anything else. So if it's based on opinion, it's man's law. If it's based on truth, it's natural law. And so that is where the idea of moral relativism fits in. Moral relativism, again, is this idea that, well, right and wrong is whatever we think it is and whatever somebody else says it is. It's irrelevant of what it actually is, right? And you're not following your own conscience necessarily of right and wrong. You're suppressing and saying other people can decide for me. That too is a problem. So natural law is essential because it says, hey, you own yourself, and these are universal principles, such as understanding that, for example, if you do harm someone else, why would you do that if you don't want it done to you? Again, the golden rule. Going back to what the natural law actually is. So, more upon this, we understand natural morality because we're dealing with morality. Natural law is not moral relativism, it's making a claim upon objective morality. What I like to call natural morality, to kind of clear things up a bit more. Here is a chart that really breaks down everything about natural law. Maybe you're completely new to this topic and you're like, what does this have to do with Lord of the Rings? Well, as you saw, the ring and its manifestation of evil and fear, all these ideas go back to state power and power being vested in certain individuals. They have the plan for order, and that they get to decide how society should work. Okay, and so understanding this is that maybe there's actually a universal law or set of rules that is present in nature that we can observe, that we can abide to. And there's not actually laws by man that actually do us any real justice, since every form of government or man's law doesn't ever last. It never actually works. Why is that? Perhaps it's because it's not aligned, again, to natural law. So understanding basic right versus wrong is essentially understanding natural law, because that's how you understand your rights. People question why they're losing their rights, or again, losing their ability to free will. It's because they do not understand right versus wrong. Rights versus wrongs. That's how you know your rights. And so a right and a wrong are mutually exclusive. That means they're both different. Okay? A right is not a wrong is not a right. And so anything that is right is not a wrong. This should be very simple for most people. It's already common sense. I'm going to this idea because this is ignored in the case of evil. In the case of what Sauron was trying to do. Again, getting rid of love. Getting rid of respecting other individuals and their own free wills. Replacing their free wills. Saying, I get to decide what you should do with your own life. So it's forgetting rights, because nobody actually has the right to tell you how to live your own body, because that is your own property. All transgressions of natural law, which is crimes, real crimes, involve a victim. No victim, no crime. And they also consist of a form of theft. For example, all transgressions constitute a theft of some sort. Theft of physical well-being, theft of sexual choice, theft of physical property, theft of security, and theft of consent. That would be assault, rape, theft, trespass, and coercion. And you can learn more about this in a documentary that recently came out called Mark Passio and the Science of Natural Law, in case you are interested. And this documentary is about 1 hour, and it goes deep into this idea. It'll ask you questions, so you can help yourself understand these concepts for yourself, and learn more about this idea of objective morality, ultimately understanding where your rights come from, what freedom inherently is, what slavery inherently is. When Tolkien says this ring is going to enslave you, what does that mean? Does that mean you have no free will left because you're essentially giving up your own life for another person's own will? You're living in expression of someone else? That's what slavery is. It is an amount of ownership, right? If you do not own yourself, you are a slave. If you do not act on principles that you own yourself, then you will become a slave. And that is what we have to pay attention to in today's world, because there still exists slavery in many different forms. I have a video about that as well. And you can see here more among the questions of statism, because you might be unfamiliar with what statism is, and I said that is ultimately what the One Ring is. Here are 5 questions you need to ask yourself, and I also put it on one of the sheets that I created, which I call a natural law summary sheet. I created this because I teach the subject natural law. Number 1, is there any means by which any number of individuals can delegate to someone else the moral right to do something which none of the individuals have the moral right to do themselves? Do you think evil cares about morals? Do you think they would seek to be the authority rather than you following the authority of morality? This is where natural morality comes in, which is why I don't call it objective morality. Because I like to get specific. If we're saying it comes from nature, we're saying it comes from a source, an intention, which thus means it's objective inherently, truthful. Because truth is objective, it just is what is. And you don't have to take my word for that, that is what truth is. It's already present. People go into these long rants about what truth might be, but it's simple. It's something that none of us can truly ever explain ourselves, because we're human beings. We're not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. Our understanding of truth shall ever increase. I don't claim to be perfect, none of my actions necessarily are, but I try my best based on the knowledge that I gain. That's why natural law is based on our understanding of it. When I say natural morality, that is supposed to be our authority. Now, when you have authority that is man-made claiming to be morality, that is the problem in the world. That is the One Ring. And the reason why is because it's a man-made authority. It can never truly be morality. And morality, if you have a moral compass, should be your authority. It shouldn't be the other way around. Just because something is legal does not mean it's right. Does not mean it's moral. And again, how could you even create laws in the world if it doesn't even fit the definition of law? If it's never universal and eternal, it means it's never going to work. If it's based always upon the opinion of man, do you see all these red flags that appear? And then you question why the One Ring is so dangerous, yet we feel like we need it. And we feel tempted by the need for such a power to exist in this world. Well, we're going to explore more about this because you're going to be confused, and I expect you to if you're completely new to these topics. But it does connect very deeply with Tolkien, his writings, his thoughts, and his movies. Statism is the belief that there is such a thing as authority vested in certain human beings, magically giving them the right to rule over other people. This authority means that certain people, who we call government, have the moral right to issue commands to those whom they rule, those under their jurisdiction, and that their subjects or slaves have a moral obligation to obey the arbitrary dictates or laws set by their masters. Most simply put, statism is the belief in the legitimacy of slavery, of man's law or unnatural law, and in man being God, also known as archanism. So right off the bat you can see Sauron is a figure trying to be an archon-like figure. You can look up the word archon. This is how we get the word anarchy or monarchy. It comes from the word archon. So monarchy means one ruler, because the word archon means ruler. And so anarchon means no rulers. And we're going to explore more about that. But to understand archanism, it's the idea that rulerism, essentially, Sauron gets to be the ruler. He is the archon figure, that man can be God. And he wants to rule over other people and enslave them, tell them how to live their lives. He wants to be God. And people fall to statism to create that condition of archanism. Again, somebody doesn't just end up in power by themselves. It requires numbers and numbers of people to create that power, to help them get in power, to keep them in power. That is statism. And like I said, that is the ring. That ring tempts people, and it tempts them to want to be of power. They crave it. Statism is expressed through following orders among negative natural law expression of fear, ignorance, confusion, and chaos. Unconsciousness, the law of slavery, essentially, because it legitimizes slavery, in the case of regardless of ownership or rights, and understanding that, well, government gives you your rights, whatever they put on their piece of paper, that is what they call law, and no questions asked. You don't learn about rights, you don't learn about morals in school, for the reason that you will never be able to defend your rights. Immorality, inequality, division, having no principles, creating violence, justification, moral relativism, the plane of effects, denaturing, brain imbalance, mind control, occultism, the lack of responsibility, negative knowledge, self-loathing, and the death of imagination. If you don't think this is the case, well, you can check out that documentary that I gave you, but I also have a presentation. This is from one of my slides from my presentation called Unnatural Law. So, there's not really such a thing as unnatural law. There's only natural law. But I made a presentation on unnatural law. Why? Because it shows us that we can take something that is natural and again turn it into something that is evil. Turn that into something that is not of life. Something that degrades life, takes it away. And that is exactly what the evil in Tolkien's world is doing. Who is this guy? This guy is also not a good person. He was a good person. He was part of the White Council. They were supposed to be good, but he too was tempted by evil. Why? His name is Saruman, and we mentioned him before. He is an evil doer. He's the wizard, another wizard. There's multiple wizards in Middle-earth, in Arda. He's a bringer of skillful deceit, and he ultimately is the representation of the trait of politics. And I'll explain why, because his name, literally comes from Old English saru, which means device, design, contrivance, art, and the whole name means man of skill. So he is a man of skill. And we talked about that before. We talked about skill and using art, but for using good or for using bad, depending on the user, depending on the person behind the magic. So here you have somebody who's very skillful. They're very good at what they do. Tolkien stated, quote, Saruman's voice was not hypnotic but persuasive. Those who listened to him were not in danger of falling into a trance, but of agreeing with his arguments while fully awake. This is why I say it's the trait of politics. Because every time you see a politician get up on stage, especially I'm coming from America, in this case of scenario in the 21st century, you see, get me elected, or I can do this for you, I can do this. Very convincing voices. I'm among you, we're for the people, the common good. This is the trait of politics. It was always open to one to reject by free will and reason, both his voice while speaking and its after impressions. Saruman corrupted the reasoning powers, so people couldn't make the decision for themselves if they should really understand what's going on in the world, and if they should perhaps not follow orders in the case of feeding evil. He made it look convincing that evil could be good. Or that, essentially, going back to the idea of moral relativism and understanding our morality, that a right can be turned into a wrong. Or that certain rights exist when they don't, because they can be created by man. That might sound complicated, but that's ultimately what is being done here. Fandom states, quote, Saruman is cruel, uncaring, and treacherous. He would do anything to achieve greater power, even if it's meant siding with Sauron, betraying his own allies, especially the White Council, and destroying the forests. Again, the trait of psychopaths, not caring, having no empathy. Quote, initially he plans to use the One Ring to overthrow Sauron, so he seeks to use it for good. Oh, we have an intention. He seeks to use magic for good. But if the One Ring is inherently bad, because the state power is inherently immoral or bad, can you use something for bad if it's for good if it's inherently bad? You can't, because it's inherently bad. No matter who the wisest, the best can use it, it will corrupt them. And that's what we saw with the ring. Is it doesn't matter who can touch it. You couldn't have Elrond, you couldn't have Gandalf, you couldn't have the elves, you couldn't have anybody. You had to have a hobbit from somewhere across the whole stinking world who didn't know anything that's going on. That's what happened in the Lord of the Rings. And they used that hobbit to destroy the ring, because he was the only person who would be the best capable of destroying it, and not being influenced by its corruption, by its mere will to want to enslave the person with the ring. And so he plans to use the One Ring to overthrow Sauron. See how that went in the movies? It didn't work. And rationalizes every evil thing he does as the means to a good end. So yeah, I'm just playing into their system. I'm going into their system, and it's not a big deal because I can use their system against them. I'm strong enough. I don't have to worry about it. My will is strong enough. I don't have to worry about being corrupted. This is his logic here, because he's a skillful person. He sees that he can use his skills in a good way by feeding into evil just a little bit, just so he can destroy evil ultimately in the end. It doesn't work. By the time of Sauron's resurgence, however, Saruman has given in to his ambition and lust for power. Again, because any person given power is basically inept to abuse it, and simply wants to rule Middle-earth with or without Sauron, because this is the nature of power. It's the nature of power. This is, again, the truth of power. It corrupts, it creates compliance, and compliance allows its growth of evil. Because again, if it weren't for the millions of people who followed this one dictator in history, that dictator would have never ended up in power. So, it's the nature of power that it corrupts, and it's the nature of order following, or compliance, otherwise known as statism, that helps that power grow and manifest. So it's the nature of that One Ring to cause Sauron to continue his evil doing. That ring is the source of all evil, and that's why when you destroy the ring, all the evil goes away. So what is this? This is a very holy picture, perhaps you may see. Very spiritual, very out of this world, per se. That is Eru. Eru Ilúvatar, the One, the Father of all. You may see this as God, per se. So, Eru, the One, Father of all. Tolkien states, quote, "The corrupted, as was Melkor or Morgoth, and his followers, of whom Sauron was one of the chief, saw in them the ideal material for subjects and slaves, to whom they could become masters and gods, envying the children, and secretly hating them in proportion as they became rebels against the One." So what Tolkien is saying here is that the evildoers, Saruman, Sauron, Melkor, anybody following the evil darkness, the dark energy, the dark lord, essentially, and you can see this in Star Wars too, right? Following the dark force, join the dark side. Going against, ultimately, he says they became rebels against the One. So they became rebels against God. Because again, Melkor wanted to undo creation. He basically wanted to undo what Eru created. what the God created. What was meant to be. This is the Father of all. So when Sauron says Melkor is the Father of all and giver of freedom, no, it's a false God. It's saying, well, Melkor can be God, but he's not really God, but we can make him God. And we can do so by unmaking the world and corrupting it to our will. This is the real God, Eru. Okay, and when Tolkien states that these evildoers, again Sauron, Melkor, envy the children, they're referring to the children of God. Because evil is against the children of God, and the children of God are all the free peoples. I'm not even kidding, this is the terminology that is used. All the free peoples are children of God. Those who go against the One, who became rebels because they're against the One, they're essentially then also hating the children of God. They want slaves for themselves. They don't want children of God. They want slaves for their new world that they want to create. The free peoples of Middle-earth are elves, not all humans, dwarves, hobbits, and Ents. Ents are basically tree people. Dwarves are like smaller beings, more superhuman, just like elves. And humans, well, self-explanatory, they're humans. We'll break down each one as well. As they were referred to free peoples as were such because they had never fallen under the sway of the evil spirits Morgoth or Sauron. So that's why they were free, because they were not influenced by evil. Does this make sense now? To understand that evil is this manifestation of statism and ultimately what is slavery. And so it makes sense that the people who are not evil are free peoples who fear that system of slavery. And that fear is not going to necessarily help them, because they have to stand up to it and say, we're not going to allow this slavery or evil to continue. So in order to remain free, they have the task of destroying the ring, the one ring of power. So Eru is the real authority. Okay, what we call authority. There is no authority invested in certain human beings. No one has the moral, legitimate right to rule over anybody, because I own me and you own you. There's no such thing as the right to rule. We all have the right to our own body. It's our own property, our own possession. We do not have the right over other people. I don't have the right to enslave another person or tell them what to do with their own life. I can advise them, recommend them, but I can't tell them what to do and force them to obey under threat of violence and thus fear. Because that's exactly what Sauron and Melkor, they lived by fear. That was their internal and external expression, as we talked about before. So, what is real anarchy? Why am I saying anarchy? Why is that important? And maybe you saw that theme, because you're questioning like, well, you're questioning all state power. You say, well, Cory, what do you mean statism is the one ring, and that government is the one ring, and Sauron is this government, and he seeks to control other people? Well, we can't live without government, possibly, and government, it's an essential part of life, and it might be evil, but it's a necessary evil. A necessary evil? What evil is necessary? If evil, by definition, is a denaturing of what life is and what is necessary or essential for humankind. From Greek prefix an, which means without or the absence of, and Greek noun archon, which means rulers, anarchy by definition means without rulers or masters. So by definition, anarchy does not mean without rules. It means literally without rulers. Because we explained what the rules are. It's natural law. Karma is ever at work. The golden rule is ever at work. People know generally what right versus wrong is. It's not hard to understand that hurting someone is wrong. And in the case of self-defense, you have every right to defend yourself. The non-aggression principle, the self-defense principle, very easy to understand. You always have the right to defend yourself against someone actively trying to do a harm doing to you. And at the same time, you don't want to actively do a harm doing to someone, to do harm to anybody else. That is the non-aggression principle. The self-defense principle is, again, defending yourself against somebody who does want to commit harm against you. And if we understand right as being something that does not cause harm to another person, that does not create a victim, that does not create a form of theft, then we can understand, again, what is wrong does create a victim, is a form of theft, is something that harms another individual. Tolkien states, quote, "My political opinions lean more and more to anarchy, philosophically understood, meaning abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs. If we could get back to personal names, it would do a lot of good. Government is an abstract noun, meaning the process of governing, and it should be an offense to write it with a capital G, or so as to refer to people. If people were in the habit of referring to King George's council, Winston and his gang, it would go a long way to clearing thought." So what he's saying here is that we see this government as this physical thing, but it doesn't actually exist. It's just a bunch of people. You know, can we say this is what government is? No, it's just a bunch of people and a bunch of buildings. That's all it is. It's not actually a thing we can identify and say, oh yeah, well here, you can meet government. This is government. Hey, you want to meet my friend government? This is not government. And it's not your friend either. But it's not something that actually exists. It is actually completely an unnatural system. And so he's saying, you know, making a distinction between what government is and the act of governing. The act of governing could be differently seen from what government is. And so he says it would be just much easier if we could just refer to people as people, not as any what's special. Anyway, the proper study of man is anything but man, and the most improper job of any man, even saints who were at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing other men. So he's saying, you know, nobody is meant to boss another man and what to do with his own life. He's literally saying right here what I said for the past hour or so. I said nobody has the right to tell you how to live your own life, and Sauron and Melkor and the evil forces in Lord of the Rings, they want you to follow their will. They want to create their vision of order, and they want you to obey and comply under threat of violence by fear. And so he says, not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity to rule, to commit to state power. Again, the One Ring. I will not bow before the Iron Crown, nor cast my own small golden scepter down. In the Lord of the Rings, the conflict is not basically about freedom, though that is naturally involved. It is about God and his sole right to divine honor. So people following natural law, not following man's law, not following Sauron, the ring. The Eldar and the Numerians, these are people part of also the Lord of the Rings, believed in the one, again, Eru, the true God, and held worship of any other person an abomination. Again, Sauron is known as the abhorred, the abomination. We see these literally word per word. So, Sauron desired to be a god king, and was held to be this by his servants. If he had been victorious, he would have demanded divine honor from all rational creatures and absolute temporal power over the whole world. Do you see how we just make this connection from Tolkien says, I'm an anarchist, I believe people should be free without rulers, but there still is rules. And we'll get into what he means when he actually says there's actually rules. He says it too. He's also saying here that there is no right to rule, and Sauron is trying to be God, and that Eru is the real God. So even if in desperation the West had bred or hired hordes of orcs and had cruelly ravaged the lands of other men as allies of Sauron, or merely to prevent them from aiding him, their cause would have remained indefeasibly right. Indefeasibly right. So if somebody has the right to self-defense, because I just said that, people have the self-defense principle. When you understand natural law, this all just ties in very easily. Self-defense is an inherent right, again, against somebody who wants to do harm to you. When you understand this, what he's saying is that it is indefeasibly right that people can, defend themselves against those who seek to impose their will on them. As does the cause of those who oppose now the state god. The state God. He's right there saying Sauron is the state. He is the government. And he is claiming to be God. And marshal this or that as its high priest. Very interesting, he uses the word high priest. And you may say, oh my gosh, I'm just making all this up. Like, this is literally in his own quotes. high priest, the first form of governments that we can observe is in Mesopotamia, in the Sumerian Empire. And that empire was considered the first form of government, and it consisted of a simple structure of slaves and masters. Those who claimed to be masters, because they could only claim to be, they're not legitimately masters, deceived those below them and saying, well, you have to obey me. Again, this is statism. So everybody, all the slaves say, okay, yes, I have to obey. They become statists. And the masters say, well, we have the divine right to rule because we're the high priest class. We have the right to rule. God gave us this right to rule. We can rule over you. And there's no questions asked. If you disobey, you are threatened to go to jail. You are threatened to pay this. You're threatened by violence. And thus you are in a state of fear. And thus you always feel like you must comply to the system of slavery. You're ultimately feeding the system of slavery by being a slave, embracing that slave-like mentality, and thus statism is creating that slavery. You are contributing to that evil, that state god. Even if it is true, as it unfortunately is, that many of their deeds are wrong. He's literally saying that what they're doing is wrong. Even if it were true, as it is not, that the inhabitants of the West, except for a minority of wealthy bosses, live in fear and squalor, while the worshippers of the state god live in peace and abundance and in mutual esteem and trust. So although, the people who follow the states, they're good, they're following orders, they fought in the army, they're good, they're respectful, they did their honor, they did their service. And they're given all these benefits from the states, and look, they're now in retirement, and they have all these benefits, all these financial benefits, and these are all incentives to essentially still feed into the idea of statism. And so what he's saying is, although there's people who are living in fear of this state god, the people who essentially embrace this darkness of the state god, they get to live in peace, they get to live in harmony. So this is why people turn to darkness. This is why statism is so dangerous. Because people deceive themselves into the idea that authority is legitimate, that man can become God, that man has the right to rule. But that right doesn't exist in nature. And in the 1800s, in real life, of course, referring to the physical form of slavery, the overt form of slavery, rather than covert form of slavery, which is what we have now, do you think it was easy to say, who will pick the cotton? And, this is wrong. Why should anybody be a slave of anybody? Why are we doing this? Do you think it was easy to make that argument to people who were already used to thousands and thousands of years of slavery? Because government existed for about 6,000 years, doesn't mean that it is right. Because it's essentially a monopoly on violence in order for people to comply, in order for you to maintain that system. You cannot maintain a system of power unless people believe that that authority is legitimate. That you belong in a position of power, that government must be there. That belief system must be in the minds of the masses for that system to persist and to continue to exist in doing what it's doing. And so if Sauron wanted to continue his power, his sole objective was to keep deceiving people into these ideas of statism. Again, real anarchy is this idea of no rulers. There's a lot of people who will call themselves anarchists, and they don't understand this either. Because they just want to cause a bunch of chaos, they see symbols, they want to look cool, they just want to steal a bunch of stuff. But they don't make the connection between morality and the natural world and the intended state of the world and understanding slavery, defining freedom. This is what real anarchy is. It's breaking it down, and it's through Tolkien's perspective we understand what it really is. It's not about, we're going to protest and we're against the system. No, it's about understanding reality, that you own yourself and nobody owns you, and that you don't own anybody else either. Tolkien states, quote, "I am not a democrat, only because humility and equality are spiritual principles. Natural law is spiritual laws, corrupted by the attempt to mechanize and formalize them. So people take these ideas of rights and oh, certain people, you're free, and we the people, and all these ideas, spiritual principles, and they put it on paper. This Constitution gives you your rights, and this is where your rights come from. No, they don't come from a piece of paper. They don't come from human beings. They come from a birthright. They come from nature. And that is what Tolkien is saying here, because there's spiritual principles. With the result, if they mechanize and formalize these spiritual principles, with the result that we get not universal smallness and humility, but universal greatness and pride, till some orc gets hold of a ring of power, and then we get and are getting slavery. That is where we are right now. As we have people who attain the ring of power, and that ring has not been destroyed. It is statism. It is statism, and as long as statism is present in society, we will always get slavery. We will always get it. And Tolkien is saying it himself right here in his own words. Because he says, we're not going to get universal smallness and humility where people care about each other, and there isn't this person who says, I get the right to rule over everybody, and I get this great greed and ambition. Somebody can have that, and people will have that. It's a matter of who's going to feed that. There's always going to be wrongdoings, but there's also going to be good doers. The question is, which one do we feed is up to us, the responders, the people in the environment. Do we uphold the good ideas or the bad ideas? It's dependent on our knowledge. If we don't know something is wrong, do you think people are going to follow what is wrong if it looks appealing and it's very skillfully worded and deceptive, and it's appealing to their finances and their greed and their ambition? Of course they're going to follow that, because they cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's people behind them saying, follow me into the darkness, I'll keep bringing you back into the tunnel, and you'll be fine because you're with all of us and all of us are doing it. Just because everyone's doing it also doesn't make it right. And that too is a problem with democracy. Just because 99% of people say something should be done does not mean that 99% of people should impose their will on the 1%. So, Tolkien also stated the greatest example of the action of the spirit and of reason are in abnegation. People have referred to natural law, even in the past, as consequentialism, many other terms, but also the law of reason, the law of conscience, because again, your conscience is your ability to choose right over wrong behavior based on the knowledge that you have of the two. So when he says, well, of spirit and of reason are in abnegation, well, spirit is having the knowledge present, and reason is looking at that knowledge and making decisions for yourself. And this is an action of abnegation. What does that mean? Well, Latin abnegation comes from abnegationem, or abnegare, which means refusal or denial. Refusal or denial. What are we denying? And how come refusal or denial is actually the greatest act of reason in spirit? Well, in this case, we're denying something that doesn't exist. Something that isn't natural. We're not introducing anything new into society, saying, well, we need to create a free world condition, it's got to be exactly like this, and everything's going to work like this. People ask, well, how is this going to get done? How am I supposed to know? I'm just one being. We're going to come up with many different strategies, and there's many people who come up with many better strategies than I can think of. Why am I to say how everything should get done? The very world that we want to live in a free world, is where many solutions are applied, and many people get to pitch in. It's not about me and what I think should get done. Who am I to say how everything should be done? We're asking for the very world where so many people can decide what can get done, not just one person. Again, not one will imposed upon others. So we're refusing here the legitimacy of a state, to deny the legitimacy of rulers. The idea that someone else has a higher authority, higher claim over your life and property than you. That they have the right to rule, and you are denying an illegitimate authority. Because again, you recognize Eru, you recognize God, you recognize nature, you recognize natural law, you recognize morality, you recognize sovereignty, you recognize responsibility. You do not want to uphold slavery. You do not want to uphold fear. You do not want to uphold violence or justification. You want to uphold what is just. What is justice? Because you cannot have justice without some sort of basis of right and wrong. And so that helps us determine our actions. Because wouldn't we want a better world? Well, how do we get a better world? Well, we need to know what makes it better. And that is the problem, is people will say, oh, well, we can make a better world through this or that. Do you actually know if it will? Because if you were claiming to want to fix the world by running for office, do you recognize that very act, if that is even moral to begin with? Is it even moral to seek that position of power to begin with? So that power ultimately belongs within yourself, not imposed upon other people. Everyone has power within them, and everybody is ought to use it. Love gives way to life-giving empowerment of all peoples. So instead of fear, love is the force that feeds all human beings into a positive manifestation rather than a negative manifestation. What we showed before through the charts of the fear in Sauron, the fear of Sauron, the One Ring and how it impacts people mentally and physically, this is natural law expressions. That was negative natural law expressions. The idea of fear, ignorance, confusion, control, and chaos. There's an opposite to that, and that is positive. That would be love, knowledge, sovereignty, freedom, and order. Not chaos, but order. And not the fake order, but actual order. That being understanding the harmony within nature as a whole that already persists. It's not chaos. You might see it as chaos, but everything works in a certain fashion. That is law, because the law governs every action. Natural law governs the actions of human behavior. Ridding of the seat requires knowledge. So if you want to get rid of Sauron, and you want to make clear that he's an enemy and that he's deceiving people, how do you escape them out of that? Knowledge. The opposite of ignorance, which is refusal of truth. Knowledge is acceptance of truth. Love is consciousness. Fear is unconsciousness. Again, if you're acting out of fear, you're not really conscious of what's going on. You're just going to do something out of instinct, out of survival. Oh, I'm in fear. Oh, what do I do? You're love. Oh, I care. What is it that I need to look into? Oh, I care about you. I care about that. And I'm more conscious. I'm paying attention to what's going on because I care to pay attention to what's going on. I care about the world that I live in. And I'm not in fear of everything that's happening around me. That being said, paranoia might be seen as a good thing in regards that it can make you more conscious of what's going on, but as long as you're still not in a state of fear, and you're still doing things out of love. The question of love versus fear is a very, very important dynamic that plays among everything, because love starts the whole positive expression, and fear starts the whole negative expression. Ridding of fear, again, and we know Sauron is the creator of fear, that requires love. So we need love, we need knowledge, and thus we need everything else that comes with it. Ridding of confusion, because people are going to get confused of what's going on, especially as Sauron brings darkness in, and everybody's like, whoa, my gosh, how's life going to be? It's chaos, oh my gosh. That requires sovereignty, recognizing, no, you do not have the right to rule over me, and I know that. And I care about that. And I care about the fact that people are dying over there. I care about the fact this person isn't living their best life. I care about the fact that people are dying for your cause, which is not supposed to happen because no one has the right to rule. Again, knowledge. This all connects. Everything connects. And that's the point of this presentation, is to find these connections, which you can make ever more than me. Ridding of mind control requires freedom. knowledge is the only true power. Because you kept seeing that I brought everything to knowledge, and ultimately to know what's happening in the book, to know what every word means, to even read the book, to know the movie and to watch it, to understand it, everything goes back to knowledge. To know of the very nature of the power dynamic and how pyramid systems work in such a system as government. It's not just hierarchy. Okay, hierarchy is not government. Government is a special type of hierarchy where it says this person is a vested authority and this person has no choice but to obey that authority. It's not, hierarchy is not inherently bad. There's hierarchies all over nature. The question is knowledge being hidden from people so that certain powers vested in certain individuals and everybody else doesn't have enough power to relinquish that control and reclaim their own rights instead of giving them away? That's where knowledge comes in. And so knowledge is the only true power, because also the One Ring's own intention and provision is also knowledge. Sauron created the One Ring for a sole purpose, and what was that? To enslave people. He did it to enslave people, and he knew that that is what it would do. And that was its intention, was to provide Sauron with more knowledge, because he enslaved their minds and their thoughts. He could control what they did. It provided him with more power because he was able to do more, and thus he has more knowledge at his suit to create the order that he desires. Again, this form of order, which is essentially a form of chaos, but a form of control. It ends in chaos because, as you see with every government in history, it never ever truly lasts. It always results in a mass death, which is democide. Again, Melkor's other name is mass death, which you can see as democide, because that is the number one cause of unnatural death, and that stands for death by government. Number one cause of unnatural death. That is the death by the One Ring, essentially. So, to understand this expression chart, I recommend looking it over for yourself. Notice sovereignty is internal monarchy, because monarchy, mono-archon, one ruler, stands for you are in control of yourself. If it's internal monarchy, I am in control of myself. If it was external monarchy, then other people are in control of me. Sauron is my leader. Melkor is my leader. I must follow orders. No, you control yourself. That's sovereignty, internal monarchy. Super reign, sovereign. Okay, that stands for above rulership. You have no rulers because you rule yourself. Freedom, external anarchy, which means that you understand anarchy is simply representative for freedom, that it's an already given condition of nature, that we must embrace our actions to it by first understand that we own ourselves, and that we do not have the right to rule over other people, and that understanding that external anarchy means there's no confusion inside of ourselves. We understand that the world needs to go about and doing its own thing. We should not impose our will on other people. So no rulers externally, one ruler internally, because only I could rule myself. If that makes sense to you, that's what sovereignty and freedom is, the opposites of which is confusion and control. Control would be external monarchy, confusion is internal anarchy. Because if you don't have control over yourself, you're going to give yourself to the masters that, again, knock on your door and say, I'll do everything for you, and I'll provide you with everything you need, and don't worry about it. You might be a slave to the system, you might live somewhat comfortably, but you are a slave, and you are limited, and you're ultimately going to result in mass amounts of death. So what are these folks here? We're going to talk a bit about races in Middle-earth, in the Lord of the Rings. This is very, very important to understand. These guys are the Hobbits. If you've seen them in the movies or in the books, they look like human beings, and that's because, well, their nature is very similar to that of human beings. These are the very, very important people to this presentation. And this is where they live. I want you to notice that they live under a hill, under a mountain, in a sense. They sort of integrate the environment into their living space, and they have a lot of shrubs, a lot of gardening, you'll see. A lot of communities very close to each other. Farmland, especially, the hobbits love food, so this is something that they do a lot. They have their own unique way of integrating themselves with the land, which is something that we should recognize and understand. Simplicity is what the hobbits teach us. The hobbits teach us simplicity. These are the unknown or ordinary peoples in a life of no rulers, just rules. And I put that in quotes because Tolkien says it himself. Quote, "The Shire at this time had hardly any government. Families for the most part managed their own affairs. Growing food and eating it occupied most of their time. In other matters they were, as a rule, generous and not greedy, but contented and not moderate, so that estates, farms, workshops, and small trades tended to remain unchanged for generations. There remained, of course, the ancient tradition concerning the High King at Fortnost, or Norbury, as they called it, away north of the Shire, but there had been no king for nearly 1,000 years, and even the ruins of King's Norbury were covered with grass. For they attributed to the king of old in all their essential laws, and usually they kept the laws of free will, because they were the rules, as they said, both ancient and just. So the laws of free will were the rules." Take of that as you wish, based on everything that I said before. I'm not going to give you a huge recap, but free will means you are able to decide what you want to do within your own life. And if somebody has control over your free will, you're not free. You're a slave. The hobbits are, of course, really meant to be a branch of the specifically human race, not elves or dwarves. Hence, the two kinds can dwell together, as at Bree, and are called just the big folk and little folk. They are entirely without non-human powers, but are represented as being more in touch with nature, the soil and other living things, plants and animals, and abnormally, for humans, free from ambition or greed of wealth, also being small, thus ordinary peoples of great feats. And that I find absolutely admirable, actually admirable, not, what we call Sauron the admirable and then he becomes the deceiver. This is admirable, because these people do not seek power, they help each other out, and there is no need for rulers, there is just rules. And because everybody knows these rules, they do not need rulers. And so you might ask, well, for today's world, how do you create a world where you don't have rulers like this? Well, perhaps it's by sharing the rules, such as that of natural law, just like in these different formats that I showed you, whether I have this natural law summary sheet or the Mark Passio and the Science of Natural Law documentary, or, I even have a list of questions here for what the documentary has in here. What does natural law mean? Do human beings have inherent rights? What is the definition of a human right? Do human beings have the right to defend themselves against aggression? Does everyone have the same rights, or do some people have more rights than others? Is government authority morally legitimate? Does government authority exist in nature? Is taxation by government morally legitimate? Are drug laws morally legitimate and necessary? Or do people have the right to put into their body what they choose? Are driver's licenses morally legitimate and necessary? Or is unlicensed travel an inherent right? If a government law prohibits an action that doesn't cause harm to anyone else, are people morally obligated to obey that law? Is morality objective or subjective? Again, going back to the idea of natural morality, where do human rights come from? And do human beings have free will? That's the last question that's asked in the documentary. Do human beings have free will? Because that documentary is ultimately a call for action, so people can share this knowledge of what their free will is, what their rights are, understanding that their free will must align to their knowledge that they can now gain of morality, of understanding what's right versus wrong. And so that is the rules. In addition, they had sheriffs of really just average people to just watch the land. They were not dressed up fancy with other clothes. Hey, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, and they have a special badge and a whole costume on. No, these are just average people watching the lands, making sure everything is cool. It's people being in charge of their own property, recognizing ownership. These are natural principles. There's nobody that came in and asked for power or corruption, because there was no rings of power there to corrupt this society. The rules are symbolic for that of which we know is free will aligned to natural law, as I just said. So here you have it, unknown, ordinary people, and that is the importance that we see within Lord of the Rings time and time and time again, is this return to simple life, to a respectful life, having fun and hanging out with other people, taking care of what you have. So what is this? Well, these are elves, right? These are people who look very elegant, very sophisticated. You know, they got their wines, they got all their fancy art, as we saw before. They have magic on their side, so they have a unique system, perhaps, that we would assume. This is where they live. At least one of the places where the elves remain in is called Lothlorien, in this case of scenario. There's also Rivendell and Aaron Los Galen. There's a lot of other places, but you can see that they live in the trees. So again, similar theme. You have here people living in the trees, abiding to nature, not really creating anything new, but harmonizing with nature, understanding it, so to live with it in harmony and not go against nature. So again, anything that is evil is likely not to do that, and as you saw with Sauron, you could look at his empire. Everything is destroyed, everything's remade. There's no trees really to be found until the tree people actually fought against them, ironically enough. But yeah, you had, you know, the darkness of the lands of Mordor and the orcs and Sauron and Melkor. They're basically all on the same side. It doesn't look like this. It's not pretty. It's not harmonized with nature at all. So the elves are representative for what is superhuman, as I like to call it. They, like I said, are more sophisticated. Maybe you see it as more of like a higher consciousness human being. But as Tolkien said before, human beings are closely related to hobbits, not elves. Our nature is different. So from actual anarchy, it states, Rivendell is the perfect Platonic republic under the care of the wise rulers, but it is rigid and constrained by Elrond. Its success depends upon the longevity and nearly incorruptible nature of the elves. So elves are immortal. They're not anything like humans in this regards. They are not mortal. So they have this system where it's everybody really understands everything, so there's no need to really worry about corruption all that much. So but these people are still not the most free, and that's why they couldn't have the ring. You know, if anything, they would really destroy it with the magic that they have, because they would quickly turn to darkness, and they too would become corrupted by it. So although they might have this, you know, unique system of magic and understand it, they too will become corrupted by power. So Tolkien states, quote, elves are certain aspects of men in their talents and desires incarnated in my little world. They have certain freedoms and powers we should like to have. And the beauty and peril and sorrow of the possession of these things is exhibited in them. The elves represent, as it were, the artistic, aesthetic, and purely scientific aspects of the humane nature, raised to a higher level than is actually seen in men. That is, they have a devoted love of the physical world and a desire to observe and understand it for its own sake and as a reality derived from God in the same degree as themselves, not as a material for use or as a power platform. So they really just have a perfect system. Everything about elves is perfect. You don't have to worry about anything, because everything they are, they're perfect, and it's like, you know, they look like me right now with all these rings and stuff. I'm not perfect, and I can't be an elf, although I may be dressed up like one. So it's to understand that the elves are essentially superhuman. It says, yet Rivendell is a step down in freedom from the Shire. In spite of the strong will and high character of the elves, it is still Frodo, a hobbit from the completely free Shire, who is selected to carry the ring. And the elves knew it. They're like, here, Frodo's got to do it. The hobbit's got to do it. Even an elf would succumb to its power. If the ring is state power, then only the most free can hope to survive its influence, because they understand that they are free. They understand that they're free. They're not in a system of mental enslavement. Again, I have a video about this, and it's actually titled Slavery Still Exists, and It's Not What You Think. Highly recommend you check it out in case you're new to this idea of slavery and understanding more of what this is. Then we have these guys. We talked a bit about the orcs. We talked about Melkor and Sauron. These are the orcs. And you can see right off the bat, just from looking at them, they're not cleanly, or they don't look friendly. They're very angry. Not that anger is necessarily bad, but it's consumed them. They don't look most smooth or natural or human-like. They have a lot of deformalities within their person and their character, the way their mannerisms are, and what they do. So let's observe more about the orcs. This is where they live. This is that example of Mordor I kept talking about. You don't really see any trees here. Do you see any trees? I don't. That's not a tree over there. This is just part of the tower with the eye that watches over to make sure everybody is compliant. You have armies here together. You don't see neighborhoods and people getting together. You don't see shrubs and gardening. No, you see dragons watching over everybody. You see eyes watching over everybody. You see everybody's corrupted. You see fire and lightning and destructive forces. You see people working together, but because they're only following orders, they're not doing it out of voluntary mutual cooperation. They're doing it for some evil means of somebody else's free will, because they don't have free will of their own. So the orcs are representative for what is corrupted. From actual anarchy, Mordor should be obvious. Full power. Absolute control and absolute evil are equated through Sauron in the One Ring. The orcs march rank and file. There is no light, again, darkness, except that of the evil eye upon Barad-dûr, watching to make sure every orc does his duty. It is the ultimate authoritarian state. It makes sense. If the ring is the state power, the source of statism ultimately in this case, other than Sauron himself, it makes sense that the orcs would be the most corrupted form, the most statist form, and thus their form of government is the most authoritative. You have different flavors of statism, and ultimately they always become authoritative. Even the ones that try to be the limited, small, oh, we'll be fine. It's in the nature of power to always expand, to always grow, to always find more greed and ambition, to seek that ring of power. That ring of power must be with me. And then another person takes on the ring and they don't know how to control it. And you have these scenarios where it never ever is perfect, because human beings aren't perfect, and that's another reason why they should never impose their will on other human beings and say that they are the rules and they are the law, when they can never be the law. Only the law, natural law, can be the law. Tolkien states, quote, I have represented at least the orcs as pre-existing real beings on whom the Dark Lord has exerted the fullness of his power in remodeling and corrupting them, not making them. Remodeling and corrupting them, not making them. Literally saying, well, they were a life form that was perhaps at a time good, but turned evil, corruption. That God would tolerate that seems no worse theology than the toleration of the calculated dehumanizing of men by tyrants that goes on today. Tolkien even makes the connection for me. I don't even have to say it for you. That this, in his books, the orcs and their following orders and statism in the ring, is symbolic for what's happening right now in the modern world. there might be other makings, all the same which were more like puppets, filled, only at a distance, with their maker's mind and will, or ant-like operating under direction of a queen center. The orcs are definitely stated to be corruptions of the human form seen in the elves and men. In orcs, they were useful slaves. They were useful slaves because they were completely slaves. You know? I mean, no free will of their own. If they had any, I mean, it would just be still the free will of Sauron. Because thinks he can just do whatever, no consequences to his actions, because he is the law. And that's another reason, you know, it's like, is it really the anarchists that want chaos? Is it really they who don't want any rules in society? No, they recognize the rules if they're a real anarchist, and that's why they are an anarchist, and they're simply recognizing reality, first and foremost. And it's actually the people who want to control over other human beings that recognize there's no rules and actually want chaos. Isn't that a very interesting, completely polar opposite perspective from what we've been told often in the school system from a very young age? That freedom is dangerous, and that is chaos, and that... Does that mean slavery is order, and that slavery is peaceful? Well, that seems odd, but indeed that is what we're sold so we can remain in our state of servitude, literal state of slavery. Well, we had to come down to it. It was only bound to happen. Here you have humans. Yep, you got a bunch of humans. They're all over the place, aren't they? You know, you got people dressed up in different costumes, you got different governments going on, kind of like a mix between everything that we talked about, right? Well, how about the humans? This is their kingdom that you might see. Again, you know, it's not as, I'd say, as peaceful or as nice as the Shire, where everybody's together in communities and neighborhoods growing food together. You just have some city, and it seems kind of crowded and sort of built there for the need of protection from war or whatever appeal to whatever type of order that the person in authority desires. And we always see that these authorities within man's empires are always corrupted. They never work. Even in the movies and in the books, it never works out ultimately. And Sauron purposefully, when he constructed all his rings, he created many rings, right? He had the one ring that controlled all of them. He gave most of the rings to man because they were easily most able to be corrupted. He didn't give it to elves and dwarves because it didn't work on them. The elves undid it, the dwarves had no impact. The humans did, and they became corrupted. That's why the orcs were also, you know, humans that became corrupted. So what about humans? Well, from Actual Anarchy, the website again, Rohan is a loose feudal monarchy held together by Theoden. Tolkien shows us the danger of a wise ruler being corrupted by evil through Saruman's agent, Grima Wormtongue. The nation nearly falls to the orc invasion because of the corrupting power of Saruman. Again, the politician. Sauron and the Ring. Gondor is a crumbling empire that has finally succumbed to its own size and lack of wise leadership. Gondor is a human kingdom. The reins of power still remain to be abused by the insane Denethor, steward of Gondor. He becomes so desperate and trapped in his own madness that he refuses to call for aid. When Denethor commits suicide in despair, he almost drags down the people of Gondor with him. Why? Because the people of Gondor are in a system of statism. They think that everything that must be done by the government. Oh, I don't need to protect myself. I got guards on the street. Oh, I got the police out there. They can do everything for me. I don't have to worry about my own life. Well, you know, everybody else will handle everything else for me. I don't need to be responsible. I don't need to be sovereign. And that is ultimately what statism creates. It's this system of cowardice and this system where it's like, I am dependent on someone else to live life for me and tell me how I should live my life. Because they own you. Government from Latin verb governere, which in Latin the B is the V, you see here actually means to control, and from the noun mens or mentis is mind. So if you break down government, governmental, govano mentis, govern the mind, control the mind, it is quite a distinction to make, because we were talking about mental slavery, we're talking about limiting people's free will, controlling their conscience. This all connects into this idea of what government is by its own definition. Humans have much to learn from the Hobbits, as you can see from just looking at all these other races, as their nature isn't much different compared to the elves, which possess elements of perfection, right? We can't be elves. We can aspire like what they have and all the knowledge, and they kind of can help us in a sense. But the Hobbits, we ought to look forward to trying to kind of replicate their behaviors. And I don't just mean that in game, in story, in narrative. I mean that in real life. We need to look at what the Hobbits are doing, because these are essentially human beings that have done things right, and literally right. So we aren't perfect, and we need to recognize that, and the Hobbits aren't perfect either, and they have recognized that. Humans are not elves and should not become orcs, because if we become orcs, then we're corrupted, we're, denatured, and we can't become elves. Humans shall fulfill their own nature, because everybody has a nature of their own, every race in this regards, and every law has a nature of its own, and if we best want to understand that law, then we understand natural law, because it's the only law that exists if it's natural. So that is where we understand nature, and that's why my message, and you'll see on my channels and throughout a lot of my own works, I say nature is the answer. I say that very often because that is the phrase, the motto that I go by for this matter. Now we have this folk over here that we found a lot throughout the books and the movies, Lord of the Rings. His name is Gollum, right? And I like this photo because it has the hobbits in the background, and we have Gollum right here. Why is this symbolic? Why do I like this photo? Well, you'll see. Gollum is the representation of temptation. We talked about temptation before in the diagrams we showed, with how you might be in a form of dependence and lack of self-control, and you are tempted for that ring, you're tempted for that power, for that greed or ambition. The reason why I like that photo with the hobbit behind him is because Gollum was a hobbit. This is his new name. Just as, Sauron was also Mehron, Gollum was also Smeagol. Smeagol was his original name. He essentially became corrupted and denatured into what is known as Gollum. So from actual anarchy, Smeagol represents us all. The common individual tempted by power, wrapped in the ring's blanket of comfort, that we find reason to ignore the slow release of our individuality. We choose the pleasures the state gives, as Tolkien even stated, while ignoring its cost. Rather than examine the effects of the ring upon himself, Smeagol gives up, sacrifices his identity, and becomes nameless. Absorbed fully by the temptation of the ring, because he was with it for the longest, of state power, Smeagol becomes a slave. In the end, Gollum chooses self-destruction with the ring rather than give up his precious, but not before he fights tooth and nail to protect it. So this is the hardened statist who cannot escape their mindset of the government needs to exist, and I need to have it, and it's mine, it's my precious. Those unable to overcome their confirmation bias will defend their own view. This is cognitive dissonance. This is much easier to do than to change worldviews. They will see those who want to reduce and remove the power of the state as an attack on their lifestyle. They will see you, freedom lover, as a threat and thus evil. You don't want my plan for order? Well, you want chaos. Yeah, because you don't want government? Well, you want chaos. You're an anarchist. So you want freedom? You want chaos. eventually their golem will overcome their Smeagol and they will fight to save the state. And that's ultimately what happens, is people will sacrifice their own identity for the state, and they will find pleasures and comfort in the state, and they won't know how to escape it, especially once their whole reality is based upon it, and they provide a whole education system that validates it. All the systems are based on validating it. Whether you're in a lawsuit or running for office or teaching about it, all it is just validating the system, the nature of statism. All you're doing is just enforcing it, even by using the flags, the symbols, the materials, anything that represents that state legitimizes its existence. Unless you're specifically talking about ideas that state is supposed to stand for, then why not just stand for those ideas? Because that state can never ever truly represent those ideas, especially as a state is always bound to corruption, and if it's bound to individuals, those individuals are always bound to change, and they're never perfect. So stand for the ideas themselves and teach those ideas. Don't teach symbols and rituals and ideologies. Teach the ideas and get to the root cause. Look at the bigger picture, not just at the root cause. So based upon everything, because we're going to wrap it up soon here with this presentation, I hope you maybe seen more about this perspective. Don't worry, we're going to talk a bit more about action. What is Sauron really? Well, he's the embodiment of the state god, as Tolkien even said. The Archon, the Eye, the one eye that watches over everybody. That's also another manifestation of Sauron, not just the ring. The manifest of denaturing or evil. He's essentially the government, because the statism of the One Ring is what allowed him to have his power. That is what he created. Said, I'm going to create this belief system that's going to warp people's mental vision of reality, and it's going to validate me being the ruler, and thus I can then be the ruler. That is what Sauron did, and I specifically talk about Sauron here because he is the enemy we see so often in the movies and in the books. Melkor's not mentioned, that maybe not as much, but most people know Sauron, and this is what he really is. He's the sorcerer of the belief and authority. He's essentially a social engineer. He's influencing people's minds, their decisions, and how they go about within their culture. He's the dark magician behind mind control. So essentially, he is the sorcerer behind what is known as government. And I put that in quotes because, again, is there such a thing as government? I asked one of those questions on here. I said, does government authority actually exist in nature? No, it's completely man-made. It doesn't exist in nature. It's a completely man-made construct. If you look at hierarchies and animals coming together, it has nothing to do with the system that we're referring to and the One Ring. This is not a natural thing. And it's funny because, like I said, we always refer to government as this physical thing, so to see it through an actual physical lens like the ring, it helps us understand it so much more. Sauron's also the aggregator and perpetrator of statism, of the One Ring, again, because statism is the One Ring. So he is the one who's pushing the One Ring, he's the one who gave out all these different rings, he's the one who created the ring, so keep in mind, he's ultimately the enemy. But the ring is too. The ideology that gives him power is ultimately what matters, because otherwise this guy is just another guy like everybody else, and he doesn't have power because nobody gave it to him. And so Melkor, of course, was part of the problem as well, but don't forget this. Sauron is the deceiver. He is the enemy. In Melkor and Morgoth, again, I have a picture here now of the eye. This is important. Melkor Morgoth, first Dark Lord, arises in might, anybody who seeks power. Great death, every government, because it results in democide, number one form of unnatural death. King, says it right there. King, that's it, that's all his name means. King. He is king. He's representative for all people who seek authority. He refers to himself as king of the world. He seeks authority over everybody and everything, as much power as possible. He is the elder king, the master of lies, the lord of the dark, the lord of slaves, because government is slavery. It is no coincidence that when we first saw government, we first saw systemic slavery. Because how could you have systemic slavery if there is no system to perpetrate it and say this is all the slaves that consist of it? No coincidence again that the Mesopotamia Empire, which is known as the Sumerian Empire, the first form of government, is a simple structure of slaves and masters. So, when Sauron calls him the Lord of all and giver of freedom, he's referring to freedom for himself, so he can do what he wants with the world that is about. Okay, not freedom for everybody, but freedom for himself. It's like saying, do not tread on me. Well, yeah, okay, do not tread on me, but I get to tread on you. Well, no, you should. It's like saying, well, okay, I don't want any rulers, but does that mean you want to rule over other people? Nobody should rule over anybody, period. And so, nobody could be the Lord of all if Eru was supposed to be the Lord of all and the Father of all. Do you see the connections that are made here? Morgoth is the exact opposite of life. He is evil. He is denaturing. He is denature. So what we need to do is return to life. This is where we're going to get deep into action. Or, it shouldn't be that deep. It should be pretty simple. It should be simple, something practical, not something that's super complex either. Return not to convoluted evil. Return to simple life. Again, observe the Hobbits. Actual Anarchy states, at the end of the novels, Tolkien takes us back to the Shire. The corrupt Saruman has sought revenge upon the Hobbits by bringing in ruffians, immigrants of low character. This ruffian network enslaves the Hobbits, forcing even the peace-loving inhabitants of the Shire to take up arms in defense. Notice, self-defense. Good that the Hobbits did that, because they understand the rules. Tolkien's final message is that when you remove corruption from power, expect those who were corrupted to fight back and take revenge. Even a peaceful society must be ready to defend itself. There are those among us that will fight to protect their state-provided comforts. Some are even willing to use violence to do it. They will throw their bodies into the fires of Mount Doom to prevent the destruction of their own precious, the ring. Addicted to state-provided resources, laws enforcing their version of morality and propaganda, they will feel trapped. Previously being dedicated to projecting their morality through state power and law, they will have a huge struggle with cognitive dissonance, as I mentioned before. Those who love freedom and liberty will point out how the Sméagol's of the world, again Gollum, who Sméagol was corrupted into, have been serving evil by consenting to state rule. Because Sméagol had this ring for so long, he became Gollum, he became corrupted. The ring is state power. This forces the mind of the Sméagol, statist, to choose between two realities. Either they were wrong in the past and thus have to deal with the guilt of spreading corruption, or they will reject the message of the freedom lover to prevent the obvious discomfort of re-examining their worldview. And this again shows and highlights why people submit themselves to darkness. Why Sauron turned, why Gollum turned, why the orcs turned, why Saruman turned. It's because darkness consumes them. Because they allow themselves, they provide an inch of opportunity where power sucks them in and they don't know how to get out. And they are living their life by temptation and fear and confusion, and they need to now spread it upon everybody else to help themselves feel better because now they're insecure. They have insecurities within themselves, and that's why they need to seek order and security for everyone else. And they can't live with themselves with the fact that they don't have this order in their own mind. There's a lot of mentalities that are going through in that process, again referring to occultism and psychopathy. So we need to understand that it's not easy to get over this process of statism or the ring, and I'm assuming maybe you're watching this as somebody who likes Lord of the Rings and you're new to this perspective of statism as a whole, and I don't blame you. It was very hard for me, myself, to get over this worldview of statism, of this belief in government and authority, and to understand, wait, it's completely illegitimate and man-made and is not actually moral. And maybe you even understand that and you're like, well, what does it matter? Well, it matters because, like I said, anytime we participate in action, with such a system, we're legitimizing slavery. And life belongs to all, and in order to truly be equal, we need to embrace natural law because we're all born with the same rights. The minute we say, well, somebody has more rights than someone else, we're automatically perpetrating inequality. And all the other things that I mentioned under that slide talking about statism. So it's understanding statism that ultimately is going to free us, because that mindset is the most dangerous. And that's what Larkin Rose also said is the most dangerous superstition. I have a brochure here, The Only Way to Achieve Freedom. And I have quotes here from Right is Might by Richard W. Wetherill. I have The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. And I have The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. Here, this brochure I made. And you can find more about this. I'll share with you at the end a website where you can find more resources with this if you're interested. Only because I create stuff like that, so people can learn more about that perspective. But understanding this, it's like, wait, I said government is slavery? Look at the arguments made for both. They are the same. Slavery is natural. Government is natural. Slavery has always existed. Government, as we know, has always existed. Every society on earth has slavery. Every society on earth. Just because everybody does it, again, doesn't mean it's right. Look at the moral side of it, and look at how it actually always results. Should we not learn from history? Should we not want to become better human beings? Then we should understand this. So we have a journey to make, because we recognize it's not easy. It's not easy to understand this perspective. It wasn't easy for me, and I wouldn't expect it to be easy for you. And if you're new to it, well, perhaps you got to embark on an adventure so you can destroy that ring for yourself. I created a movement to share more of these ideas because of how important they are, and as even Tolkien said himself. And I respect the fact Tolkien talks about this. His quotes are amazing on this. Tolkien states, quote, "If the conflict really is about things properly called right and wrong or good and evil, then the rightness or goodness of one side is not proved or established by the claims of either side. It must depend on values and belief above and independent of the particular conflict. A judge must assign right and wrong according to principles which he holds valid in all cases. That being so, the right will remain an inalienable possession of the right side and justify its cause throughout." He says, "I speak of cause, not of individuals. Of course, to a judge whose moral ideas have a religious or philosophical basis, or indeed to anyone not blindly by partisan fanaticism, the rightness of the cause will not justify the actions of its supporters as individuals that are morally wicked." What he's saying right here is that actions are ultimately so important. And I said natural law governs the actions to our behavior. We're looking at the actions, and understanding of that individually is right or wrong per action. And so when I said, every action that is wrong is a form of theft, creates a victim, causes harm, that is ultimately understanding our actions in right versus wrong. Notice he says the word basis, philosophical or religious basis. Natural law is not religious. I would say rather spiritual, if anything, but you could say philosophical, whatever you want to say. Honestly, it's just natural law. You could call it science because you can understand it for yourself. It is a basis, and you have to have principles. In order to even have these ideas, the idea of justice, you have to have this basis of objective morality or natural morality present and taught to people. Morals should be a guide to our human purposes. This is still Tolkien speaking. The conduct of our lives. Conduct, what does that mean? It teaches us what to do and what not to do. A, the ways in which our individual talents can be developed without waste or misuse. And B, without injuring our kindred or interfering with their development. Right there, he perfectly says what a wrongdoing is. And did anyone ever come to him like I did with you and I said, oh, well, watch this documentary about natural law? No, but he understands it. Why? Because it's supposed to be common sense. Knowing right and wrong is not supposed to be hard. If it is, that's a problem. And that shows you the world that you live in. Beyond this, he says, and higher lies self-sacrifice for love, which is important in this process too. You'll notice that within the books as well. Sacrifice, as always, as a means to say to always fight for truth, never give up. The chief purpose of life for any one of us is to increase according to our capacity our knowledge of God by all the means we have. All the means we have. Always to do our best in learning from the truth. We can't always perfectly align to truth, but we can do our best to do that. Recognizing that first there is a truth to be found, or that there is a God to be found, or that God is truth, or that the God is natural law and truth is natural law, or that truth is morality. These things should be seen as one and the same as well. By all the means we have. Quote, if you imagine people in such a mythical state, in which evil is largely incarnate, and in which physical resistance to it is a major act of loyalty to God, I think you would have the good people in just such a state, concentrated on the negative, the resistance to the false, while truth remained more historical and philosophical than religious. That right there is very important too, because that tells us, okay, again, the importance of self-defense, physical resistance. It's saying do not put up with the system if you have to defend yourself against the system with other people as well, because the system is going to try to use violence so you can still comply. So have other people with you so you can disintegrate from the system. We'll talk about that. And he says, you know, it's important to look at the truth and have it more historical and philosophical than religious. And again, this is coming from somebody that some people criticize and say, oh, well, he's a Catholic. Well, he's saying right here, it's more historical and philosophical to understand this. And it actually helps us understand evil more if we can understand it through this perspective. And then you wonder why he has a story talking about the ring being this physical thing representing spiritual ideas, and the whole story being really representative for all these different types of allegories that he couldn't escape from. And recognizing that naturally all these allegories would come of it, because that's just how life is. Where there's meaning in everything. There's truth in everything. So free peoples of all kinds must come together in a fellowship to destroy the One Ring. And that's where I created my movement, Nature is the Answer, NITA.ONE, for this very reason of creating this fellowship, of people coming together, at least having at least one community in the world. If we can get to many, many people, that's the goal, of course, so that some people will embrace it and act upon it. I don't expect everybody to. I don't expect everybody to understand it all the way either. But if they can understand a general aspect that, yes, I rule myself and these people don't have the right to rule me, and everybody in that town or community understands that, they can get out of that system. And if the government tries to keep them in that system by using violence against their own populace, that would cause a bunch of media uproar. People would say, what in the world, their own government doing this? Isn't the government supposed to be for the people, by the people? And then, let's say this group of people who does this, they're saying why they did that, and they're showing why they did that. Perhaps they have a flag for the movement that I have that simply represents nature as the answer and nothing else. Not pointing to a fake authority, but to the real authority, again, Eru or nature, and that will help wake up more people, and then they see that and they say, well, this is why they did what they did, and we can now follow suit, and now a domino effect happens, and people can now live among the Shire, free for thousands of years, because that's what happened with slavery too, is we don't need that anymore. We realize actually life works better without it, in fact, because now everybody's more free. And in a freer world, you have a more moral world. In a more moral world, you have a more free world. That's the law of freedom. Because as morality declines, freedom declines. As morality increases, freedom increases. That's why understanding natural law is so important. Do not be deceived. So from the famous poem, let's read it. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. If we replace that with the state, in understanding that the one ring is statism, the state to rule them all, the state to find them, the state to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. The state wants to seek control. It's going to try to get rule over everybody. I mean, they literally have the word rule right there. Not talking about rules, but rulers. Because what is going to rule? A material thing can't rule somebody, especially if that material thing was made by somebody. The person behind that material thing is ultimately what's going to try to rule you. So when he uses the word rule there, you know he's referring to Sauron, referring to him ruling over you. In the system of the state, the same thing. And I can replace this word state with money, and I get the same result. The state will use money as a means to control you and rule you. But ultimately, it's not money that rules you, it's the government that rules you, because they create the money, and it's your belief that they need to rule you that ultimately rules you, because that legitimizes the fact that they can rule you. So ultimately, it always comes down to the idea of statism, the belief that they can rule you. The state to find them. They will find you, and you can try to go off grid somewhere else. Some people just tell me, oh, why don't you just move somewhere else? Yeah, I can't just do that. Do you think I could just go somewhere else? Why can't I just live where I am? Why can't I live anywhere on earth? Freedom of association to live where I want to live, free. Real freedom. And I embrace that. In freedom, yeah, there's going to be some chaos, but the fear of chaos should not then constitute the fear of freedom. Chaos is a teacher. It teaches us. And this chaos from the state, slavery and violence, which always is in every state, that is chaos that we should learn from so we can move toward a freer world. And in the darkness bind them, when the state gets a hold of you, you become endowed by that ring, right? That state. If you're in this place of darkness, because you don't recognize that the state is inherently immoral, in order for that state to exist, there's certain knowledge that you don't have. Knowledge of natural law, knowledge of natural rights, of your sovereignty and responsibility. Because if they taught you that, you would be free and you wouldn't be in their system. So you were kept in darkness. So you're not in the light of that knowledge. Because in Freemasonry, literally light is knowledge and darkness is not. Is having that knowledge kept away. That is symbolic also for the pyramid with the eye on the top. The eye with the bricks below show that the light is concealed from everybody. And we're in this hardened bricks. And in order to really get that light to everybody, to share that knowledge with everybody, you have to break those bricks. Get rid of the darkness so that way the light can be for everybody, because that light belongs with everybody. No darkness should bind over anybody. But it can, and it will, if the state is allowed. And although it is wrong for me to harm you, somehow it's legitimate when the government does it. Does that make any sense? Do not be deceived. That's the main message of this PowerPoint, because that's what Sauron did, that's what Saruman did, and that's what the orcs became corrupted by, the humans became corrupted by, that's how they turned to orcs, Gollum became corrupted by. It's all through deception that they came to have that mindset. It is through this manipulative politics that got them to that scenario. So be aware, know of statism, know of natural law and your rights, then pass it down. That's the real action, honestly, that you can do to really change the world. Tolkien states, quote, "The enemy," again, Sauron, "in successive forms is always naturally concerned with sheer domination, and so the Lord of Magic and Machines. But the problem that this frightful evil can and does arise from an apparently good root, the desire to benefit the world and others, speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans, is a current motive." So you see time and time again people saying, I'm going to run for office, I'm going to do for the people, I'm going to be good. And then it just gets worse. Nothing actually changes. And you say, oh, well, yeah, this was good. We did this. It doesn't. It never actually ever even lasts. It always gets worse. Always. That's a guaranteed, because by law, again, these are wrong actions. Power does not vest in certain individuals. No human being should be able to possess that power. It's not natural. You know, for one person to be up there in this fancy scenario, oh, bow down, I'll put the red carpet for you, and oh, you have all these guards, oh, yes sir, yes sir, yeah, I'm not going to be human anymore, I'm going to be a robot, I'm going to follow orders, and you are special, you're superhuman, yeah, you got special rights that I don't. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, but that is recurrent in every form of government. If you were elected the president, you would respect that, because that's part of the process. It's part of the process, and you want to embrace that process. It's not natural. Don't embrace it. So, naturally, evil is dominative. In order for evil to even grow, again, it cannot grow without some sort of following. And I like how it talks about magic and machinery again, and again, equating the two to some degree as well. Machinery we see growing in the 21st century as well. Machinery can be used also as a means to control people, as I call it, again, the second government. Be aware of technology and its roles in your life, because that can be another tool in the tool belt of somebody trying to control you, just as the ring was a technology with some knowledge built upon so it can control you. Statism ultimately had knowledge upon what it is so it can be created so it can control you. It's a form of technology. Book is a form of technology too. This is a form of technology. Me putting together all this stuff, not just the TV, but the thoughts and all of it into material things, that's all forms of technology. Innovation. Seek wisdom. Wizards in that sense, right? Wisdom, wizards. Those of old age who have experiences upon this, because you'll learn a lot from them as well. And then connect the dots to statism, and it becomes way more sense, because a lot of people of older age still might be statist, and you're going to run into that. Upon this, but you'll understand, like, you know, oh, they're going to have life experiences like Agent Orange, for example, in Vietnam, or who knows, World War II, all those other experiences that show you how dangerous government really is, and how people underestimate it so much, and how we're actually headed back in the same direction as what we were in the past, because we didn't recognize what led up to that scenario. Fear not freedom, nor chaos that comes with freedom, nor natural change, nor mortality. You know, when I was reading through all of Tolkien's works, he talks a lot about mortality. It's a very common theme. And it's this idea of change, right? And the elves, they were immortal, but it wasn't also the best thing, because, well, you know, they wouldn't be able to, everything is like meant to be in a certain scenario, but it's, for human beings, they have a passing, they have a cycle that can't really all the time readily be seen. The elves can see these cycles because they live through all of them. So Tolkien plays with the idea of mortality a lot, and you'll hear him talking about it so much. I don't go too much into that with this presentation, but it is important not to fear mortality, and to understand that you always fight for truth and do the best that you can as a human being on this earth, and that these ideas, these spiritual principles, they're everlasting. And if you want to make an impact in this world, I mean, I can't see anything better than these ideas that I'm sharing with you now about natural law, natural rights, and understanding morality. To know what is right versus wrong, and understand what causes millions of deaths versus what doesn't, and could potentially free the world and allow more prosperous conditions where creative manifestations happen like nuts. Because that's what you see in any free country of the world. The freest times in history, people just innovate like crazy. The happiest people, they find ideas, they think outside the box because new ideas were brought to their attention, because they're not in a box. And so they're able to see so much and create so much. It's beautiful. And that's some of the things that I do in my own work too, is ever since I came to understand a lot of these freedoms, I've gotten a lot more creative with what I've done. And I've always liked to be a very creative individual. I encourage people to do the same. From The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, quote, giving power to good people, people who at least initially intend to use their power for good, can be just as dangerous, because for one to believe that he has the right to rule necessarily requires him to believe that he is exempt from basic human morality. When someone imagines himself to be a legitimate lawmaker, he will try to use the force of law to control his neighbors and will feel no guilt while doing so. Also from the same book, quote, the fundamental problem does not reside in any set of buildings or any group of politicians or any gang of soldiers or enforcers. The fundamental problem is not an organization that can be voted out or overthrown or reformed. The fundamental problem is the belief that resides in the minds of several million human beings. It's the delusion, superstition, and myth of authority, and it's these human beings that have this ideology. It includes those who have suffered the most because of that belief. Ironically, that belief in authority dramatically affects the perception and actions even of those who are actively fighting against a particular regime. The superstition drastically alters and limits the ways in which Dissenters fight oppression and renders nearly all of their efforts impotent. Furthermore, on the rare occasion that a particular tyrant is toppled, one form of oppression is almost always replaced by another, often one that is even worse than the prior one. And we see that so many times over and over again. All these, countries, we're for the people, common people. Meanwhile, they have a Bill of Rights, they have a Constitution, and they have all this stuff, and they become the most tyrannical dictatorships on earth. Not surprising, we saw this with Rome too 300 years ago, and they claim to be all moral and reasonable and have a perfect form of government, and everybody thinks their way is right, and it's never going to work. It just doesn't. And that is understand the nature of government, the nature of slavery, the nature of statism, the nature of human beings. And as we did by understanding all the different races, the nature also of power, which, like I said in the beginning of this presentation, it is the truth about power. Because when you understand the nature of something, you understand it to the highest degree, to the most that you can. From this book again, a quote, "Among those who vote Democrat or Republican or for any other party, no one recognizes the underlying problem, and as a result, no one gets any closer to a solution. They remain slaves because their thoughts and discussions are limited to the pointless question of who should be their master. They never consider and dare not allow themselves to consider the possibility that they should have no master at all. As a result, they focus entirely on political action of one kind or another." This is human beings, and this is them in Lord of the Rings. And they kept doing it over and over again. They were the most corruptible, and the elves warned about it. There's so many quotes about it. Tolkien talks about it. But the foundation of all political action is the belief in authority, which is the problem itself. So the efforts of statists are and always will be doomed to fail. Even most people who claim to love liberty and to believe in unalienable rights allow the superstition of authority to drastically limit their effectiveness. Most of what such people do, in one way or another, consists of asking tyrants to change their laws. Again, not really laws, because it's not universal and immutable or eternal, so it doesn't even fit the definition of law. Whether activists campaign for or against a particular candidate, or lobby for or against a particular piece of legislation, they are merely reinforcing the assumption that obedience to authority is a moral imperative. When activists try to convince politicians to decrease taxes or repeal some law, those activists are implicitly admitting that they need permission from their masters in order to be free. And the man who runs for office, promising to fight for the people, is also implying that it is up to those in government to decide what the peasants will be allowed to do. As Daniel Webster put it, quote, "There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters." Quote, "The harder people try to work within any political system to achieve freedom, the more they will reinforce in their own minds and in the minds of anyone watching that the system is legitimate." And this is the danger of humankind and what they've done with their forms of government, regardless of Sauron and even the One Ring, but why the One Ring was so corruptible for the minds of men in particular. Again, another quote, and we just keep going all day long. "In short, every statist, everyone who believes in government deceives himself into believing that he is a good person who supports good things and opposes injustice, hallucinating in himself a respect for his fellow man, while at the same time advocating that his fellow man be forcibly controlled, extorted, imprisoned, or even killed. The authority superstition is burrowed into the minds of the masses so deeply that they can advocate evil on a massive, nearly incomprehensible level, while still imagining themselves to be charitable and compassionate. They deem that government do things they would never dream of doing on their own. They imagine themselves to be non-violent, civilized, enlightened beings, while routinely advocating that all of their neighbors to be robbed and forcibly controlled and put into cages or killed if they resist. In truth, mankind's superficial charity, compassion, and civility is nothing but a cruel joke when compared to what almost everyone will do, or what they will ask others to do in the name of authority. I was just following orders, people say, to try to justify their wrong actions when they're wrong. it doesn't make it any better. You still carried out the wrong action, and you were the one who carried it out. You're ultimately the one to blame. And people have a very hard time with really coming to accept that the fact that they are the problem. Tolkien states, quote, "If any of the wise should with this ring overthrow the Lord of Mordor using his own arts, he would then set himself on Sauron's throne, and yet another Dark Lord would appear. And that is another reason why the ring should be destroyed. As long as it is in the world, it will be a danger, even to the wise. For nothing is evil in the beginning. The ring especially corrupts the hearts of man." And he talks a lot about how it corrupts the hearts of man, which is symbolic again for attacking the idea of love and compassion and mutual respect and mutual voluntary interactions. In a free world where people are working together, every interaction is voluntary. Nothing is forced upon by violence, because everything government does is backed by violence. There is no voluntary interactions. I didn't consent to the government being in my life. I was born into this land and somehow put titles upon me and birth certificates and all this stuff so I can be this corporate fiction in a corporation, and I have no clue any of this stuff is happening, but they put me into this system. And they also tried brainwashing me into thinking that this system is legitimate. And I'm not going to put up with it, and I'm going to teach people the opposite of that, which is understanding that nature is your system, that is the real state, that is the real condition. And so it's understanding that so that way we can align our actions to it. Service to deceit. Again, another slide from my unnatural law presentation. Here you see a tarot card representing deceit. It's the Ten of Swords. If one doesn't care enough to learn the truth and have the courage to act on behalf of the truth, remaining consistent and continuous by allowing evil doing, they maintain a service to deceit. The Minor Arcana Tarot card of the Ten of Swords represents destruction, being pinned down by a multitude of things or situations. Notice there's a lot of dark clouds right where we are, and the light is far off. It might show that there's a light that is coming, but right now the darkness is here, and that's why this guy is dead on the ground. The person lying on the ground, defeated and bleeding, may also represent a feeling of hopelessness and being trapped by emotions or mental anguish, since swords represent strife in the mind. The mind, again, mental slavery. Dark clouds hovering above the person signify despair and a bleak situation, as is when evil starts taking over the world. It also represents betrayal or deceit by another person. There is hope in spite of the situation, as the golden sky in the distance suggests that the current situation is bad and things will improve. You know, there's all these people that fight for wars. They don't even know why they're fighting. They're convinced to fight their fellow man. They're convinced to fight. They have a service to deceit. This is what they end up being like, and they regret it. They end up being on the floor like, man, I fought for this empire, and I was convinced about it, and it ultimately resulted in my death. Why am I fighting for these people? Who are they? I don't even know them. I'm convinced. You know? Or are you fighting for truth and freedom? Then again, you're not fighting for a government. You're fighting for truth and freedom, which means you're freeing yourself. You're fighting your own government. There is hope in spite of the situation, as the golden sky in the distance suggests that the current situation is bad and things will improve. The card indicates a troubling situation that will continue for a significant amount of time. The card suggests that an individual should not despair in difficult times to avoid ruining future prospects for success. There may be a collapse around the corner in civilization. There may be many things that happen in civilization, and you're like, well, how'd this happen? And maybe if you were, paying attention to what's going on, really what's going on, you'd see why it happens because of people's mentalities and how they go about in their life. It wouldn't be surprising, especially if you understand some of this stuff. But you have to have courage. It doesn't matter who you are, you have to have courage, because it's not easy. Going through despair, seeing other people dying and all that, it's not easy, and it could last a while. But let's have the mindset that we can change things, because that's first and foremost. We need to have the mindset that we can change things. There is truth. We need to teach it to people, and ultimately that's our action. So this is the slide that can really help you with your action, and I call it Learn. because learning helps you earn. Learn, earn. We can learn from the Lord of the Rings series and Tolkien, just as we should learn the consequences of our actions as by natural law, and that's why I have my website here, nita.one, where you could also find the brochures and the other stuff that I shared. And so I put this here on the slide so you can have a really good picture of what actually should be done to change the world. The two problems is, number one, not starting, and number two, not going all the way, not having persistence in this matter. You need to stand on your principle, and you need to stand on your principle through everything. You need to start, and you need to go all the way when it comes to teaching people this knowledge of truth. Go based upon what you know to be true. You're a human being, you own yourself. Very simple. It doesn't have to be more complex. You alienate yourself more from the common day person, it's going to be harder to appeal to them. So just start getting out there and start talking about, share your thoughts, because the problem first and foremost with this knowledge is that it's not even present for most people to begin with. The main problem is mass mental enslavement by consent through statism, and again, this temptation toward the ring, and belief, because we feel like it's a necessary belief and because we're taught into it and the ring teaches us and all that, to unnatural and immoral, harmful systems due to the lack of the main action, which is awareness of knowledge or education of natural law and rights, otherwise known as morality, in the nature thereof statism, also known as the use of human nature, of conscience, sovereignty, responsibility. If you used all that, you wouldn't have to worry about mass mental enslavement and statism and the state and the one ring controlling everybody and mass democide. You don't have to worry about all that because you have awareness and you have knowledge and you have sovereignty. You care about the world you live in and you care to take action upon it. So you also have knowledge of nature and of harm and of its manifestations such as evil, slavery, democide, and tyranny, which we see all present within the Lord of the Rings, as Tolkien also mentioned. Your action creates the movement, and the movement creates more actions. I wouldn't create a movement if I didn't see it as essential to the change that we need to see in the world, and as a modern solution as well, to further emphasize our individual change and reproduce it on a massive scale with many individuals, and getting these ideas out there as quick as possible and as efficiently as possible and over time. So that's why I created it. Like I said, your action creates the movement, especially if you're doing it in the name of the movement, and the movement then will create more action because people see why you're doing what you're doing, and they can more easily replicate those actions. So the change factors that I include here in particular that really help create this change among all this other stuff is representation or creativity, networking or guidance, and education or courage. Okay, and that is also known as integration and promotion. Think of promotion, again, creating the movement. You are promoting these ideas while integrating with other people or integrating these ideas with other things, such as I brought Lord of the Rings to these ideas. Would you care about these ideas if I didn't bring up Lord of the Rings first? And that is the point to be made is, well, most people like entertainment, they like movies, and they like arts, they like cooking, and all these other forms of creative expressions. So be creative, again, representation. But also guide other people, because you're not here to tell them what to do, you want to do the exact opposite, right? So guide them and help them. I mean, think about how you got to where you are. Ask questions, network, meet other people, at least just be there. Again, share these ideas, at least have it present. And do it in the most respectful fashion, but allow people to think about it when you ask these open-ended questions with your education and your courage to ask those questions. Because those are going to be hard questions, and some of it is going to make people feel uncomfortable, but that's a good thing if people feel slightly uncomfortable. But you have to let them process it. Let them process it one at a time, and that is how you plant the seed with everyday people, with people you really want to change their mind with. You have to be with them more and be present with them in their mind more. And eventually it'll get to them, help connect it, these ideas to everyday scenarios and things that they're interested in. For example, if you were interested in Lord of the Rings, well, this was a bridge to some of the ideas that Tolkien was talking about within Lord of the Rings, which is ultimately all about this. And it really is what most of humanity has been striving for, which is freedom. It's what humanity has always wanted. It is freedom, it is truth, it is justice. People want this inherently. One way or another, they may seek it through many different forms, but ultimately that's what they want. They just don't know how to achieve it. And through this knowledge, we come to understand it in a holistic, universal, applicable, scientific format. And that is what's so beautiful about it, is the fact it cannot be disproven. The fact that it can be understood by everybody. The fact that we simply need to apply it to all our actions, knowing that wrongdoing is harming someone, because we don't allow it, because somehow we make an allowance for government to do it, but we want to do it within our own lives. That is hypocritical. So it's just recognizing that. It's just recognition. That's it. But making that recognition requires facing realities that might make us feel uncomfortable. So like I said, that is natural. It's part of the process, because how else are you going to face it? You have to face it somehow. The truth is not easy to face. So expect it to be a bit of a struggle sometimes, but keep it up. Persistence. Again, what's on this slide is really important for you to understand, and if you ever have to come back to it to remind yourself, do so. Ultimately, there's nothing new under the sun. And that is the equation that you might hear, the phrase you might hear often, sometimes throughout my work too. The goal is to optimize humanity and nature, and to create the least amount of harm as a society, done as much as possible through all means. And so there's nothing new. I mean, all these different forms of governments, you know, oh, it's a president, it's a king, it's a this or that, they're all just the same thing, a flavor of statism, communism, capitalism, all this stuff. All these isms, they're just forms of statism, where it doesn't even matter. People can debate about economics and all that all day long. If they don't want to impose their will on others, it doesn't matter what preferences you have within your own life. You can still have your own opinions. The idea is that you don't impose those opinions upon others. That's it. So there's nothing new in the sun. It's simply to recognize that the universal truths, such as natural law, have always been here. It's just a matter of us understanding it and trying to create the most optimal and sustainable condition for humanity, to invigorate freedom and thus creativity, as we see in Lord of the Rings itself. We saw it through Tolkien. He expressed that creativity. It was amazing to see. People loved it, and they saw so much meaning in it, as I did myself, and I still do. I still play games like Lord of the Rings online. I think it's a beautiful game, and it has a lot of meaning in it. I walk around and I see people, and their names is free peoples of Middle Earth. I'm allowed to freely go about in making exchanges. That is what an open world, a free world looks like, you know? And maybe, you know, the time period that he set this in was back then, or in England, but that doesn't matter. It's human beings. It's all still human beings. And it doesn't matter what time, place. If there's nothing new in the sun, the same truths apply then just as it does now. It doesn't matter also what place in the world. Of course, we're going to have different cultures and places to respect. That's awesome. We should have that. It's all a matter of, do we impose our will on other people? That's all I'm asking. So we maintain a resource, but the question is allocation, because we have all these people. Right now, most of them are voting for elections or putting different politicians in power. What I'm saying is, instead, let's have all these people understand that they own themselves and teach other people that they own themselves. So, same resource, different allocation. So, instead of using people to promote a political party, rather use people to promote ideas, which is ultimately what it's supposed to be about anyways, is ideas and changing people's minds to change the world. Because why should we have one person change the world for everybody else when it's everybody that ultimately makes the world anyways? Do not worship nature or anything. Learn from nature and everything. Tolkien states, quote, for creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, on a recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. Recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. Don't worship natural law. Worship the ideas within, if anything, but apply it within your life. What is there to worship about knowing that you own yourself? You worship yourself? Ego? No. You don't want to do that. It's about respecting all of life, and it's about respecting these ideas, just knowing these ideas. They're supposed to be common sense, but we just weren't taught that at a young age, and that's why I have a presentation on unnatural law. And just as this could be called natural law is actually real, unnatural law isn't. The point is that you understand the ideas within it. That's what matters. And so, for the story maker who allows himself to be free with nature, can be her lover and not her slave. He says it many times. Uncorrupted, it does not seek delusion, nor bewitchment and domination. It seeks shared enrichment, partners in making, and delight, not slaves. He says the word slavery a lot, but you know what? Because that's our human condition right now. When we say that other people have the higher claim over your life and property than you, that's slavery. And people need to come to accept it. It's a hard reality, but Tolkien knows it, and that's why he said that he is a real anarchist. So, do love nature, seek to harmonize with it, understand it, don't worship it necessarily, but care about it. Care about the world that you live in. This should be simple. It shouldn't be difficult. Shared environment. I mean, this is a shared environment. You have a whole bunch of different people of all different types working together. For what? One purpose. Destroy the ring. It's evil. It's not meant to exist. It's not meant to be here, so it must be destroyed. If it's not natural, it's not meant to exist. And here you have a bunch of hobbits, you have the elf, you have Gandalf the wizard, you have the two humans here, and you have a dwarf. That's cooperation. From the journey to the mission to all things in life. And when I say mission, I also mean my movement. Nature is the answer, which I say is the message in the mission. And the mission is the message is the mission. So, the Lord of the Rings series in Tolkien teaches us the importance of cooperation for everything in life, which we shall never forget. Persistence and courage together. I mean, you see it in craft, people working together, crafting different things. You see that in Lord of the Rings Online as well, in different video games. And artisan care, right? Putting together a lot of care and effort into cooking and gardening and putting work into life. And this is stuff that people should be doing themselves, or at least, should be more community-like. It shouldn't be, let's have some big agribusiness in control of our food supply, and they're in bed with the government. No, we don't want that. So, work and effort, but also for play. It's not like life is supposed to be about work, it's about play, and there's a lot of play too, and you'll notice they have fun, they have drinks, they have parties, they have festivals. Don't forget those things in this life, because that's what really inspired me to make this presentation, is recognizing that these principles of joy and living life and having fun and fighting evil, if we can do all those things at once, I mean, I just say we're doing our duty quite well as human beings. We're having the time of our lives. And so you have independent creators and voluntary mutual cooperation at play. It's so beautiful to see people working together, whether it be in the Shire, working together cooking and gardening, and people working together to destroy the ring because they recognize it as evil. It's all a matter of knowledge, so they can do all those things. Knowledge is encouraged in a free world naturally, because the free world obligates people to be responsible for their own life. So beautiful to see. Fun and joy, like I said, from the journey to the mission to all things in life. The Lord of the Rings series in Tolkien teaches us the importance of having fun, to keep going. It's our inspiration, it's our aspiration. Life is about having fun. Celebrations, hanging out, having feasts. And, it's funny, I say feast and we use spirit as an alcohol drink, but spirit, literally, having spirit. Do you have the spirit, the courage, the energy necessary to fight against evil? Have the spirits, literally. And I'm not saying get drunk or have alcohol with you, but make this a process that you can also enjoy. I mean, you're fighting evil. There's going to be a lot of hardships. So, and don't expect a lot of hardships, especially if you're one of the only people fighting this, and you recognize this knowledge. And I'm here with you, so recognize, we're in this together. I'm willing to cooperate with anyone. But one thing for sure is that we should have fun, and that will keep us going. That's ultimately what's going to keep us going. Society will collapse, and I'll be looking at these people. I'm like, well, because you're not having fun. You're not, you can have fun even in an environment where it's like, okay, even if you're working really hard, you can try to make it fun. You can do things to try to make things fun, but you shouldn't also have to try too hard. Manifest the world, the life that you desire, okay? Life is about having fun. Isn't that the end goal? Isn't it? So the expressions, dancing, singing, and art forms, express yourself. There's so often, I ran into this so often as a younger person of age, I'm around people, they want to be on their phones, they want to be like other people, they're desiring things. talk about the very definition of greed and ambition and lack of presence and care and, my goodness, laziness and everything that comes with it, ignorance and confusion. It's like you wonder, it's because these people haven't found a life path for themselves. They can't have fun, they can't express themselves. If you just expressed yourself a bit more, get out of your bubble of I need to be what society tells me to be, you will feel so much happier. But don't also expect society to bow down to you and to what you want, because that too is absolutely horrid. That's the problem with our world, right? Is people saying, this must be done, and I want to be put on a pedestal. Like, it's not about putting anyone down or putting yourself up. Not about either one. It's about being in control of your own life, because you can only rightfully control it. And nature. I say nature is the answer. This is so important. From the journey to the mission to all things in life, the Lord of the Rings series in Tolkien teaches us the recurring importance of connecting with nature, the blueprint of and to life, because it's of, it's therefore also to life, disconnecting and aware from and of that which is denatured. Because if we are integrating more of nature, we're disintegrating from that which is denaturing. That's why when I say integration and promotion is ultimately what we must do, integration and promotion with natural law, natural health, natural rights means disintegrating at the same time of unnatural law, otherwise known as man's law or arcanism. And this idea of medicine by man, and that's going to solve everything, when natural medicine was used for thousands of years and doesn't have any side effects. So it's amazing that we recognize the inherent harmony and importance in nature. We need to hold that true forever in society, because we're destined to. We ought to. So this is understanding that nature is our world. We are inhabitants of nature. We have to respect it. It's the greatest teacher, physician, and what we see, governor. The most unifying and expansive idea ultimately is nature, because you can connect all religions to it, all philosophies to it. It's the most universal and eternal. It's not too controversial, like about this god or that. It's not about that. It's like all gods. This is nature. This is the world we live in. We can understand it by living in it, and understanding how nature works, the nature of nature. And you can just say the nature of nature of nature of nature. You can just keep going on, and also ourselves and our nature. It's self-sustainability ultimately, not just self-responsibility. It's connecting and working with nature, building in and with nature, as you saw with the elves, how they built in the trees. The dwarves build within the mountains, and the hobbits build within the hills. So that, like, can we do some of that? I'm curious, how much do we actually care for nature to do that? In some places in the world they do. In other places of the world they absolutely don't. And the way they treat nature, the way society treats nature, really tells you how much society is, free or unfree, or caring or uncaring. If they care, then they're going to be free, because again, I said morality and freedom increase together and decrease together. So it's very important that we connect with nature in that regards. Growing food, caring for animals, permaculture, natural health, super, super duper important. Never forget it. This is part of who we are meant to be. What this constitutes ultimately in this presentation is the end of slavery. When you commit to the actions, you understand this knowledge and what Tolkien's trying to teach us about the rings and his movies. From the journey to the mission to all things in life, the Lord of the Rings series in Tolkien teaches us the importance of destroying the One Ring, the source of corruption. And the only divide in this life is really between nature versus denaturing. And denaturing is essentially the becoming unnatural. Something that is denaturing is becoming more unnatural. It's not necessarily inherently unnatural, but it can be identified as such, depending on how denatured it is, because technically everything is under nature. And of course, that which is evil seeks to replace what is nature, what is life, with its own version, a new nature that people are intuitively conditioned into, shall they see it as necessary. Now, why is this the only divide? Because humankind is affecting natures the most. Again, nature is referring to ourselves and nature as a whole. And how are we doing that? We're doing it through law, because again, we use man's law, which isn't law. It's not universal, eternal, doesn't fit the definition of law itself. And we're doing it through science, because scientism and morality, essentially, if we disregard morality, or we say that certain people have rights to rule when they don't, or that people can revoke or grant rights when rights are a birthright. And health too is really important. If you affect people's health mentally too, they can't really think about themselves and their nature, how to free themselves. Health is very crucial. It's actually everything, because health in Latin stands for whole. It really represents everything that we talk about. So I consider that one very important. I'm actually an integrative nutrition health coach, so I see health as really, really important and connective to everything else. And that is through law and morality and with its effects, right? So the effects of us being God and taking hold of these ideas and imposing our will on other people, that's ultimately what's going to affect us because of its effects in the world. So statism is affecting us, our nature, the most, because we are degrading ourselves simply by saying that other people have rights that we don't, and that we are powerless in the world, and that other people are in positions to do things for us. We're automatically sort of dehumanizing ourselves, degrading ourselves, and ultimately denaturing ourselves. If we are denaturing ourselves, so we will denature. This is the in and out relationship, If we cannot free our own mind, what makes you think that you're going to help free other people's minds? As you saw with fear within Sauron, you saw that he was also bringing out the fear in a lot of people of himself. And so if we allow the One Ring, which is statism, so we will always be enslaved, as Tolkien also mentioned himself. If we allow it, we will always be enslaved, because again, it is unnatural. This is why we go back to the one divide. We recognize statism is the worst part of this divide, because it is the worst expression right now of what is unnatural. Now, that's because an unnatural system is taking hold over a very much natural system, and it is one that is influencing people's actions and their thoughts on a day-to-day basis, and it grows more and more as the governments become more tyrannical, that the government gets more and more into people's lives, and it becomes more and more apparent that this system is not to exist. And so you see here the end of slavery consists of persistence, fortitude, courage, journeying, and sacrifice. I'm going on an adventure. That's what you must say to yourself when it comes to getting over this idea, and also in sharing this idea with other people and truly dropping this ring into Mount Doom as it belongs, because it belongs actually to be destroyed, not to be in Middle Earth, not to be on Earth. The end of slavery, here we have, quote, "I have found that it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love." This is a quote from Gandalf the Grey. Another quote, "Even the smallest person can change the course of the future." That's by Galadriel. Another quote, "All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us." This is time being essentially the real currency. Are you going to sit around and just watch TV or do nothing, or are you actually going to get out and do something? Use your time wisely. Another quote from Gandalf the Grey. Another quote, "The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair, and though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater." And that's what you must understand, is that truth above all will always prevail. And if you promote the truth, it doesn't matter ultimately if there's evil present, the truth will always rise above. So simply always stand up for it, and it will manifest. As long as people do stand up for it, we will never ever truly be slaves. We can maintain the freedoms we have now and have even more, shall more people come to understand it. Now, some further notes, because we're going to be wrapping it up here, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation on this. World government symbolism you might see as well because of the One Ring and the push for one government may be apparent in the world today. I figured to just throw that out there because some people can make the connection there as well eventually, if they do research into, one world government and all that. You can look into that for yourself. I'm not to say really as to what they are doing. I'm simply to speak upon the nature of government and its impacts within our own lives. Eye symbolism, you can look at so much different symbolism, I'm sure, throughout the books. I wasn't here to do a super long segment on that, but ultimately the eye is all seeing, right? It watches over everyone, makes sure they're all compliant, and it's seen as this portal that Sauron it keeps inverting, and there's gifs and stuff like that online of this eye. You can just look up Lord of the Rings eye, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And you'll notice it's consuming your vision because it's something that's like it pulls you toward it. The eye is constantly a theme throughout the books and in the movies where it's consuming your vision, and that's what's basically, you can see that as the free will of Sauron consuming your free will. And your eye is basically being consumed by his eye that he created. So he can see the world through your lens and ultimately take control of your consciousness, your eye, your soul. He consumes your soul through this eye. If you want to use that as a form of symbolism, go ahead. I figured to just also throw that down. Another note is that the humans and elves have their connection where they have, human consciousness. Elves kind of look like humans, but they're the more sophisticated, again, superhuman-like. You can see them as the higher consciousness, higher knowledge type, but you have to understand that their nature is different. The reason why I say the hobbits we need to learn from is because their nature is relatively the same as us humans. Now, there's care for nature, and there's not veganism or any one diet. That one's very important as well. Is we can understand the harm done to all things and all living things, whether it be plants, ourselves, pregnancy, the environment, to smaller critters, to smaller animals that don't always end up on camera or in slaughterhouses. And we could try to seek to reduce the harm as much as possible. And that in the case if we do eat meat because we recognize it's essential and nutritious, we shall do so if we understand that logic and understand that not one diet fits for everybody. There is also a level of transition for different types of diets. There's everybody living in different environments and everybody having different nutritional requirements, and there's different agendas playing out because the diet industry is a billion-dollar industry. Keeping in mind that if you just have a care for nature and you're conscious of what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis and you're growing your own food or you're in charge of your own food supply, does any of that even matter? If you understand that statism is the real problem, then focus on it. And if you're going to focus on veganism because you want to apply human rights to animal rights, I'm okay with that. But don't forget statism. Don't forget the human slavery that's happening right now. And I'm glad that you share that compassion with other animals as well. But do keep in mind to not fall off track for the one journey that we have to do, which is ending this ring, the source of state power. And if we can do that, then a free world will allow us to share these other ideas a lot more. Because it's not just this idea that people want to share. There's many ideas that people want to share that people see as so valuable for our care for nature. But if we have a care for nature to begin with, and we allow nature in its own state and environment to consist of and persist by itself as it is, under a free world, then everything else can manifest after way easier and more naturally without censorship, because that's also what's happening right now. So the One Ring invisibility symbolism as well can also be heavily connected to occultism. The fact that the ring gives the wearer the ability to go invisible, and the fact that the nature of government relies on certain knowledge being hidden from people, again the idea of darkness. I see that as a very strong connection because occultism is this idea that there's knowledge that isn't there. So if you're invisible and only those of the type can see you, I forget exactly how it works, but there's certain people that can see you. Only certain things can see you when you are invisible from this ring. It would make sense because certain knowledge is there for certain people and other knowledge isn't there for other people. And again, connecting knowledge to magic and how that works. This is essentially a form of magic given to the person with the ring. So thank you very much for watching, and that was my further notes on this presentation. My sources were wiki pages, Wikipedia, fandom, etc., Tolkien Gateway, and J.R.R. Tolkien's writings and books himself, which I got most of the material from. There's also more on the Actual Anarchy podcast, episode 105, and the Reed Rothbard podcast, episode 13. I didn't use those podcasts a whole lot, but they did write an article, which is where I got a lot of the text material from as well. But most of it I did through my own research of Tolkien's writings and through connecting those ideas with natural law. And if you like this presentation, I thank you very much for watching so much. My name is Cory Edmund Endrulat. Nature's the answer. Do not forget it. Thank you very much. You can learn more about this whole perspective of natural law, natural rights, and maintaining to defend who you are and your nature at nita.one. And thank you very much for watching. Like I said, I'm Cory Edmund Endrulat, and I encourage you to go out there and share the ideas of nature, share the ideas that Tolkien has long wanted to share with people. I'm sure there's connections that could be made that I didn't make, like I said, and I respect that. I respect the fact there's always more that can be seen, but these connections were very interesting to me, and so I figured to share that with you, and hopefully you found some value off of this. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.